Hey guys, tonight we're slipping beneath the surface of something you probably never think twice about but should. You lie down, maybe stretch a little, and get ready for sleep. But what you're wearing, or not wearing, to bed, that simple choice, that little flick of the wrist as you ditch the shirt or pull on those pajama pants, it holds centuries of scandal, shame, medical theories, moral warnings, and some downright weird side quests into human sexuality. And yeah, at some points in history, if you dared to sleep naked, you could be excommunicated, arrested, or straight up accused of being in league with the devil. You were a threat to God, country, and public decency just for letting your butt cheeks breathe under the covers. Picture this. You're in a stone cottage in medieval France. It's cold. Icy draft through the cracks kind of cold. You haven't bathed in weeks. Your blanket is a scratchy wool sack, and your body is wrapped in a crusty linen shift that smells like goat. You want, deeply want, to sleep naked. Just for once. Just to feel free. But outside, someone's getting flogged for looking a priest in the eye. You think you'll risk a bare shoulder? No thanks. And that's not even the weird part. Because in this story, we're going from ancient sin to trendy health hack. From religious guilt to Goop-approved life hack. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and your local time in the comments. 2. I want to know where in the world you're listening from, and how deep into the night you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in the Garden of Eden, or at least the myth of it. The air is perfect, no humidity, no bugs, no regret. You're stark naked. And it's not a problem, until it is. Because once that apple hits the ground, so does your innocence. Suddenly, your nudity is a curse. You clutch some leaves to your groin, and poof, original sin is born. And here's the kicker in this version of the story. You didn't commit some grand theft or violent crime. You just existed without pants. And from this one image, two naked people hiding behind foliage while God yells at them like a disappointed dad. We get thousands of years of anxiety about what your body is doing when the lights go out. Fast forward a few centuries, and you're lying on a rough straw mattress somewhere in early Christian Rome. Your tunic stays on. Your sandals. Maybe not. There are already whispers that nighttime is dangerous spiritually, morally. It's a time of dreams, and dreams are suspicious. They're private, they're sweaty, and they're hard to control. Sleep is the cousin of death, the priest warns, and nakedness is the cousin of lust. Put them together, and you've got yourself a demonic dinner party. You wouldn't want to tempt a visiting angel, would you? That's an actual concern. By the way, in early theological texts, angels were assumed to pop in unexpectedly, like divine health inspectors. And if they caught you snoozing sans undergarments, well, that's a one-way ticket to hellfire. Historians still argue whether this was literal fear or metaphorical control. But what's clear is that the early church didn't mess around with sleep hygiene. Let's talk about those garments. We're not in the land of soft bamboo pajama sets yet. We're talking woolen shifts, tightly belted tunics, maybe even some form of underpants that could double as punishment devices. The idea was, keep the flesh covered, not just for warmth, but to protect your soul. If you died in your sleep, you better be dressed to impress. Imagine that preparing for the afterlife with your bedtime outfit, like you might meet Jesus at 3 a.m. in a dream, and you don't want him to see your nipples. The church fathers Augustine, Jerome, Aquinas spent a weird amount of time dissecting the dangers of nudity. They didn't have Netflix. They had scrolls, sermons, and a lot of time to worry about erections. Lust was an inside job, they thought. But your clothes helped lock the doors. And yet, the more they preached about temptation, the more people fantasized. Human nature. Am I right? Meanwhile, out in the countryside, peasants were getting scolded for sharing beds, often entire families in a single haystack corner, and not because of poverty, but because sleeping too close led to impure thoughts. What were they supposed to do? Build more rooms, get more blankets. Not with those taxes. It wasn't about logic. It was about control. And here's a juicy little fringe tidbit. Some early Christian sects practiced angelic sleep, a method where married couples would sleep in the same bed, fully clothed, abstaining from any physical contact as a holy act. Sounds noble, until you realize they often failed, miserably. There's an account of a monk who had to confess after he accidentally brushed his wife's ankle and got too warm. Yep, ankle heat was a theological emergency, but this fear of the body wasn't just about sin. It was political. Rome had fallen. The barbarians were coming. If the empire was to be saved, it wouldn't be by naked men rolling around in bedsheets. It'd be by cold, armored, morally disciplined warriors who never took off their belts, even in REM sleep, of course. None of this stopped the rich from doing whatever they wanted. Behind stone walls, and with lots of servants to keep secrets, nobles had custom beds, fancy linens, and sometimes, yes, nudity. But even then, it was under lock and key. Private nakedness was fine if you were powerful enough. Public nudity, that was for criminals, slaves, and sinners. So you start to see the pattern, over and over, across cultures and centuries. The naked body in sleep becomes a battleground. Is it sacred? Is it scandalous? Is it just sweaty and uncomfortable in those thick medieval smocks? Historians still argue whether religious nudity taboos were actually about sex or simply about keeping people afraid. Either way, the result was clear. Sleep naked, and you were risking more than a cold draft. And yet, some whispers started to sneak in. From the east, stories of yogis and mystics who slept under the stars, letting their skin breathe, claiming it connected them with the universe. From desert communities, where nighttime was the only cool part of the day, came tales of sleeping bare as an act of practicality, not perversion. These counterpoints didn't make it into the European mainstream just yet, but they were out there quietly challenging the idea that skin plus moonlight equaled moral decay. You're lying in that bed again. Remember, not in Eden, not in Rome, just in your own time-traveling imagination. Maybe you've still got the blanket wrapped up like a burrito. Or maybe, just maybe, you've dared to let the covers graze bare skin. Don't worry, no angels are checking. Not yet, anyway. You blink, and now you're in a monastery in 11th century France. It's the dead of night. The stone walls are sweating with cold, and somewhere nearby, a bell tolls softly to remind you God is always watching, even when you're trying to get some sleep. You shift beneath your thick, scratchy wool robe, the same one you wore during evening prayers, the same one you'll wear to morning mass. There's no separate bedroom attire, just layers. So many layers. Not for fashion, for discipline. Sleep, to the monks, isn't rest, it's a test of purity, of willpower, of whether you can resist the devil's visit when your eyes are closed and your mind drifts into sin. That robe you're sweating under, it's a spiritual straitjacket. The monks believed demons crept in during the wee hours, slipping under blankets like bad dreams with claws. And the best defense against them, apparently, was heavy wool. It wasn't just about the cold. Though, yes, there was a lot of cold. It was about shielding your flesh. Because where skin shows, sin grows. There are records of abbots writing rules down to the tiniest detail. Never remove your tunic. Always sleep with your belt fastened. Even your sandals should be close by, in case the devil appears and you need to stand your ground fully clothed. Picture it, you're half asleep, in a room full of other snoring monks, wrapped in what feels like a horse blanket dipped in vinegar, terrified that an erotic dream might slip in and ruin your salvation. Cozy. Historians still argue whether this obsessive modesty stemmed from actual theological concern, or just a practical way to keep young men in close quarters from doing monk business. But either way, monastic communities treated sleep as a battleground. The hours between dusk and dawn were patrolled not only by night watchmen, but by invisible forces. Sleep wasn't innocent. It was suspicious. You couldn't control what you dreamed, so the church had to control how you slept. Enter the nightwear commandments. And here's a bizarre little wrinkle in some orders. Monks were instructed to sleep sitting up. Yes, sitting. Because lying down fully was too sensual, especially if you were warm, and God forbid you looked relaxed. Some poor novice monks, eager to earn spiritual gold stars, would even sleep on the cold stone floors, arms crossed like corpses, trying to simulate sainthood. One story tells of a monk who was reprimanded not for falling asleep, but for sighing in his sleep. Too much sighing meant pleasure, and pleasure was not on the menu. Meanwhile, in the wider medieval world, things weren't much freer. Out in the villages, peasants didn't have silk robes or personal bedrooms, but they had guilt, and the church made sure to deliver it door to door. Sleeping naked, even with your spouse, was discouraged unless procreation was on the agenda. And even then, there were rules. Only in darkness, no unnecessary touching, and preferably no enjoyment. In fact, some theologians proposed that if a man enjoyed sex with his wife too much, he was no better than an adulterer. You had to approach bedtime with the energy of a tax audit. Functional, efficient, and deeply unsexy. Which makes this next part so delightfully ironic. Because while commoners and monks were wrapping themselves in chastity blankets, the nobility, they were getting creative. In castles and manors across Europe, the elite had more privacy, more warmth, and more silk. And with those luxuries came liberties. A well-born lady might have a personal maid to help her undress for bed. Yes, a literal performance. And noblemen, well, let's just say some of them used bedtime as audition hour for future mistresses. That brings us to one of our more decadent sex stories. This one involves King Charles VI of France, who reportedly had an unusual sleep ritual. According to whispers from his court, Charles insisted on being read to sleep each night, while a servant massaged his feet and another gently fanned him. Nearby, his mistress, who may or may not have been clothed, depending on the day's political mood, would lie silently, ready for post-story discussions. Apparently, he believed that a properly staged bedtime helped him make more virtuous decisions the next morning. But Charles also went mad. Like, full medieval madness. Thought he was made of glass, refused to be touched, screamed at windows. So maybe his bedtime wasn't all that restorative. Still, among kings, sleep was status. And sleeping naked, that was a tricky line. Done in private, it might signal power like, I can be vulnerable because I'm untouchable, but caught by the wrong person at the wrong time. Suddenly, you're not noble, you're indecent. The difference was all about context and who wrote the diary entry. Let's slip into a fringe detail here. Some medical texts from the late medieval period started suggesting that too much heat at night could be unhealthy. A few physicians, proto-doctors in plague masks, proposed that sleeping fully clothed prevented the body from venting its internal humors. One even claimed that night sweats were a form of natural purging and should be encouraged, which led to a very awkward set of mixed messages. The church wanted you bundled, the doctors wanted you to let it breathe, and in the middle was you, confused, itchy, and possibly hallucinating from a fever. It's worth noting that many people didn't even have individual beds yet. Families slept together, not always by choice, but by architecture. One-room homes meant one sleeping area. The idea of a private, peaceful, solo sleep experience. That was a fantasy for the rich. Most people drifted off beside grandparents, babies, goats, and at least one cousin who snored like a dying bagpipe. So the notion of undressing was both impractical and socially inappropriate. You didn't want your uncle seeing you in your birthday suit. Again. So sleep remained a clothed affair, a regulated, guarded, often uncomfortable ritual. But you did it anyway, because the alternative was heresy, scandal, or just plain hypothermia. You weren't sleeping, you were surviving the night, and if you managed to wake up still warm, still decent, and without a demonic visitation, well, maybe you'd earned another day on Earth, or at least another turn at the communal stew pot. What's fascinating is that even as these extreme modesty norms were forming, pockets of resistance remained. In parts of southern Europe, think Spain, Sicily, and especially certain Moorish-influenced regions, bedtime customs were looser. The warmer climate helped, but so did different attitudes toward the body. Some bathhouse cultures blurred the line between cleanliness and sensuality. In those places, a little skin didn't spark outrage. It sparked a conversation. But in northern monasteries, you show an ankle, and you're one bad dream away from public penance. That's the world you're curled up in now. Thick wool, thicker shame, and absolutely zero airflow. You wake up to the sound of something scratching. Not a mouse, not a dream. It's the stiff linen of your own bedclothes rubbing against your skin, like sandpaper made by a guilt-ridden priest. The room is damp, the air smells like ash, and the fire has long gone out. You pull the rough fabric tighter around you, not because you're cold, but because you're scared. Not of burglars, not of wolves, of being seen. Because here, in the daily life of an average medieval peasant, your body doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the village, the church, the rules. And if you think about peeling off even one layer to sleep more comfortably, that's not just rebellion. It's a sin. Welcome to the era where even your dreams had to wear pants. You're in a wooden shack now, sharing a room with 5 family members, a pig, and one very judgmental crucifix hanging from the wall. You want to remove your tunic, let your skin breathe. Maybe itch that spot that's been bothering you since the last market day. But you can't, because nudity, even in the dark, even alone, has been tied to wickedness. If your neighbor hears you rustling too much, they might whisper something. And whispers in this village are a straight line to the stocks, or worse. That's how fast the night can turn against you. It's not that people didn't want to sleep naked. Of course they did. But want isn't freedom. And in medieval Europe, the lines between privacy and propriety were drawn with blood and candle wax. Women especially were scrutinized. There are court records, yes, actual documents where women were accused of being witches simply because someone saw them walking to the outhouse at night without a head covering, not even fully naked, just less than fully cocooned. That was enough. And if you think that's extreme, just wait. Because the bed wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a moral crucible. And the night was a minefield. Historians still argue whether this extreme discomfort was more about religion or patriarchy, or both. But what's clear is this bedtime wasn't private. Even if the door was shut, even if the lights were out, there was always the idea that someone or something was watching. Your choices in the dark defined your reputation in the daylight. And once your reputation was gone, so was your safety. Let's peel back one especially juicy layer of bedtime paranoia, the idea that demons preyed specifically on the naked. That's right. Being nude didn't just make you more likely to sin, it made you a target of incubus attacks, of spiritual contamination, of spectral seduction. This wasn't a niche belief. It was mainstream theology for centuries. One preacher even claimed that naked sleep invited the devil into the bedchamber with the same enthusiasm as a whore invites a lover. Subtle. And just when you thought it couldn't get more absurd, let's throw in some legal drama. In certain parts of Europe, if you were caught naked with another person in the middle of the night, even if it was accidental, even if it was a sibling, you could be charged with fornication, or worse. That's how deep the fear went. The bedroom was policed not by guards, but by ideology. And ideology, as you probably know by now, never sleeps. Let's insert a sex story here, one that toes the line between hilarious and horrifying. In 1320, a noblewoman in England was accused of witchcraft and seduction after her husband confessed to dreaming of her naked, repeatedly. That's all. A dream. He said he couldn't concentrate at court anymore because of sinful nocturnal visions involving her bare skin and honey. Instead of being flattered, the local bishop launched an investigation into her sleep habits. She was questioned, publicly, about how she disrobed at night. Her actual crime, owning scented bedsheets. Yes, too much jasmine. Too little shame. The case was eventually dropped, but not before her reputation was shredded like a wool shift in a hailstorm. Let's pivot to a strange but wonderful fringe tidbit. Did you know that in some alpine villages, people believed that sleeping naked under a full moon could turn you into a werewolf? Not in the Hollywood way, no howling at the moon or shirt ripping. It was more tragic. They thought your soul would slip from your body while you slept, wander into the forest, and come back cursed. So villagers would place iron nails under their pillows or sleep with garlic tucked into their collars. No one actually liked the garlic, but no one wanted to wake up part wolf either. Now imagine this, a young man, say 17 years old, lying stiff as a board in bed. His parents sleep in the next room. He's wearing a thick tunic, a rope belt, even some kind of foot wrap, because he's been told that sleeping naked leads to self-ruin. Not just sin, but sickness, a corrupted mind, ruined prospects. He's sweating, not from fever, from fear, because he once heard a story in the tavern of a boy who slept naked, touched himself, and died in a fire the next day. No one linked the fire and the sin explicitly, but the implication was clear. Don't tempt fate, or your own anatomy. Historians still argue whether these stories were designed to genuinely warn or just scare the pants back onto people. But they worked. Generations grew up associating nudity with shame, even in sleep, especially in sleep. And once that pattern is wired into your culture, it's sticky, like hot wool on a humid night. And this is where things start to get deeply absurd. In some communities, bedtime checks were a real thing. A parish priest might make rounds to ensure families were sleeping in accordance with decency laws. That meant no shared beds unless you were married, no visible skin, no unnecessary softness in the bedding. Softness was sensual. Too much comfort, too much temptation. One report describes a priest ordering a family to burn their feather mattress and sleep on straw instead, because the daughter was blushing too often. Let that sink in. What about people who defied it? There were rebels, sure, quiet ones, like a merchant's wife in 1400s Venice, who allegedly slept nude every night and claimed it helped her feel closer to God's creation. She became something of a scandalous legend. Not quite a witch, not quite a healer, just dangerously comfortable in her own skin. No formal charges were ever brought against her, but women were warned do not imitate her habits. Nakedness was catching, like a cold, or a revolution. You might think, at this point, the tide would start to turn. But not yet. The paranoia still had legs. Bare ones, and they were running straight toward the Reformation, the next chapter of bedtime drama. But for now, you're still lying there in that stiff tunic, watching the candle flicker out, wondering whether your dream will get you damned, or worse, noticed. The wind shifts, and suddenly you're standing outside a thatched roof cottage, somewhere in 16th century England. The moon is high. The sky is wide, and something about the night feels charged like it knows a secret. Inside the cottage, there's a woman middle-aged, barefoot, hair loose over her shoulders, and, scandalously, she's just blown out the candle and slipped into bed. Completely unclothed, not even a shift. She's alone, and she's naked. Now, you might think. So what? But in this world, that tiny act of personal comfort just opened a portal to suspicion, paranoia, and maybe even death, because to sleep naked is to sleep like a witch. You walk through her dreams now. They're simple. She sees herself baking, maybe picking herbs, laughing with a neighbor. But outside that dream, the village is whispering, because someone saw her through the window. A silhouette, a body in motion, a sin waiting to bloom. In Puritan England and colonial America, women didn't get the luxury of bodily autonomy, especially not at night. To let your skin touch the cool sheets without a barrier was to court temptation, to invite the devil into the bed. That phrase appears over and over in 17th century sermons, and you'll hear it in your sleep too, if you're not careful. You probably think the witch hunts were about broomsticks and bad potions, but often they started with something far more mundane. A neighbor claiming a woman slept wrong. Maybe she didn't sleep enough. Maybe she slept alone. Maybe she looked too rested. Suspicion was baked into the fabric of society, stitched tight, like the nightgowns women were expected to wear high-necked, long-sleeved, and thick enough to choke a ghost. If you had a body, you had something to hide. And if you dared to let that body breathe at night, you were practically casting a spell. And men weren't safe either. In Salem, one of the accused, a man named Giles Corey, was rumored to have slept bare as the blessed Adam on summer nights. The implication. If he was naked in sleep, maybe he was morally naked in life. It didn't help his case. They crushed him with stones. That's what fear does. It turns your bedtime habits into evidence. Let's dip into a historical sex story here. One involving a woman named Alice Keitler, an Irish noblewoman accused of sorcery in the 14th century. Among the proof against her, a servant claimed she slept naked, even during winter. and her bed never grew cold. That's right, her sheets retained warmth. Ergo, she was probably fornicating with demons. The logic was thinner than a Puritan soup, but it didn't matter. Her comfort became her curse. Alice was forced to flee the country, leaving her land and fortune behind, all because she liked the feeling of linen on skin. And here's a fringe tidbit that makes it even weirder. In some witch trial documents, sleeping silently was a red flag. Silence in sleep. That was suspicious. A God-fearing person should snore, or mutter prayers, or at least toss and turn, but lying still and quiet, that meant your soul was elsewhere, wandering, possibly plotting. It's almost comical, except it got people killed. Imagine being on trial because your sleep posture wasn't performative enough. Historians still argue whether these bizarre sleep-based accusations were sincere beliefs or just excuses to punish independent thinkers, especially women. But the effects were real. You learned to fear your own habits, and communities learned to enforce conformity not just with laws, but with midnight glances and rumor-fueled gossip. Everyone became a moral cop. So now you lie there, in this suffocating nightgown, your arms pinned under the covers, wondering if your breath sounds too calm, if your bare ankle, peeking from the sheet, might be interpreted as an invitation. You shift slightly too much. You cough too loud. Suddenly, it feels like the darkness itself is watching, waiting to report you. Because in this climate, even modesty isn't safe. It's about the right kind of modesty, the approved version, the one that says, I will suffer in this thick garment not because I'm cold, but because I'm obedient. And obedience was everything. You see it in how people constructed their beds. High off the ground, narrow, filled with straw or horsehair, with a curtain or drape to hide the act of rest. Privacy became performative. Your bed became a little theater of virtue. And if someone peeked inside and saw too much skin, the entire act fell apart. You weren't sleeping, you were sinning. Now shift the scene. You're in a Puritan home in New England. It's 1655. You've just endured a fire and brimstone sermon on the dangers of bodily temptation during nocturnal hours. You go to bed feeling like you've committed 3 sins just by existing. The mattress is lumpy, the room freezing, and the fire has gone out. You wrap yourself in a long, heavy shirt that smells like mothballs and anxiety. Your mother peeks in to make sure you're not too comfortable. No hugs, just inspection. What happens to a society that teaches children to distrust comfort? That tells them safety is weakness and sleep is dangerous. You raise generations of people who never fully relax, who confuse pleasure with guilt. And that damage doesn't disappear when the witch trials end. It just changes form. Let's drop into another tale from the archives. A woman named Mary Parsons, also in colonial New England, was accused of witchcraft in part because her neighbor claimed Mary's husband looked too well rested for a man with 7 children. That's right, rested. Not naked, not glowing, just not exhausted enough, clearly. Mary must have been doing something unnatural, perhaps sleeping too peacefully. That kind of logic. It festers in a culture of fear. It's worth noting that these fears were never truly about nudity. They were about control. Nakedness at night was symbolic. It meant you were comfortable in your body, that you weren't ashamed, and a woman or man without shame. That's a political threat, because if you can't be manipulated by fear, you might start asking questions like, why am I dressed like a haunted curtain to go to bed, or who decided a warm body meant wickedness? These aren't questions authority likes to hear, so they tie your morality to your nightwear and call it tradition. Here's another strange practice. Some towns held modesty inspections for young women before marriage, including what they wore to bed. Mothers were expected to teach daughters to sleep properly in full dress. No touching, no indulgence. One manual even recommended sleeping with a Bible on the chest to weigh down impure thoughts. Imagine the psychological acrobatics required to survive that without cracking. And yet, people did crack. Quiet rebellions formed, little bedtime revolutions. A girl rolling her shift up past the knee, a couple removing their outer layer before crawling into bed. Tiny acts of resistance, soft defiance, because the body will always seek freedom, even in the dark. And eventually, those small rebellions turn into culture shifts. But not yet. You're still in the thick of it. The night is long. The rules are longer. And your body, it's still wrapped in fear. You wake up choking on the scent of starch and moral superiority. Your limbs are stiff. Your back aches from the wooden frame of your bed. And your nightshirt, it's still on, buttoned to the top, collar cutting into your neck like gilt made of cotton. Welcome to Puritan New England, where even dreams are under surveillance. The fire's long dead, and the frost etching the window is thicker than the town's theological tolerance. You're not allowed to enjoy your rest. Not really, because if you're too comfortable at night, what else might you allow yourself a stray thought? A wandering hand. The slippery slope begins in the dark. You shift beneath your covers and hear the faint creak of floorboards above someone pacing, or praying, or spying. You never know in this place. The Puritans weren't just religious. They were professionally paranoid. If there were Olympics for guilt, they'd medal every time. Everything about their world was built on boundaries between the body and the spirit, the flesh and the soul, desire and decency. So when it came to sleepwear, there was no room for interpretation. You wore your morality like armor. Full-length nightgowns, caps, sometimes even gloves. The more you resembled a haunted doll, the more righteous you appeared. And it wasn't just for show. Parents enforced these dress codes on children the way modern families enforce curfews, except instead of worrying about bad grades or missed calls. Puritan parents worried their kids might accidentally damn themselves by showing a knee while sleeping. And let's be clear, the bed wasn't private. Not really. Family rooms were shared. Curtains were thin. Gossip was currency. If your sister mentioned she saw your elbow in the night, you might spend a week fasting in penance. One girl, according to a diary from 1687, was whipped by her father for shirking her virtue during slumber. Her crime, she'd untied her waist cord in her sleep and rolled over. Rolled. That was enough to provoke divine disappointment. This wasn't just about control. It was about crushing the idea that your body belonged to you at all. But of course, beneath all that rigidity, the human body does what it does. Desire isn't obedient. And that tension, the push and pull between repression and instinct, is what made the night so dangerous. The Puritans didn't just fear nakedness. They feared arousal, even unintentional, especially unintentional. There were sermons, actual. Full-length Sunday morning sermons dedicated to warning against the stirring of loins in the hour of dreams. That phrase is real. Preachers warned that the devil was most effective not with pitchforks or flames, but with warmth, softness, skin. That if you gave your body an inch of freedom, your soul would follow it straight to damnation. Let's drop into a sex story from the period. It involves Cotton Mather, the famed Puritan minister, and a scandal that he tried very hard to suppress. A member of his congregation, a young widow, confessed during a tearful session that she had removed her linen coverings during a humid summer night and had experienced what she described as unspeakable dreams. Mather, ever the master of restraint, wrote in his private journal that he feared she had opened herself to midnight temptation through the gateway of uncovered limbs. Instead of comfort, she was sentenced to a month of penance and isolation. And though no one ever said it aloud, the town buzzed with theories about who or what had visited her bed. Meanwhile, over in the attic rooms and servant quarters, something else was happening. Quietly. Secretly. Resistance. Because when you're forced into repression, rebellion becomes seductive. Servants, especially those in households wealthy enough to afford privacy, sometimes defied the dress codes. Not in grand ways, not in speeches, but in whispers, removing a layer, slipping out of a shift before curling into a corner, hiding nakedness under thick quilts. These acts weren't just practical, they were personal declarations. This body is mine, if only for a few hours each night. Now here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Some Puritan communities believed that sleeping naked might make you more susceptible to ghost possession. Not demons. Ghosts. The theory went that spirits of the dead, drawn to warmth and weakness, would climb under your sheets and inhabit your body temporarily if it wasn't properly armored in cloth. One pamphlet even suggested wearing a crucifix sewn into your nightshirt as a form of paranormal birth control. That same pamphlet, incidentally, also warned against excessive yawning, which was thought to open your soul to wandering spirits. So yes, in this world, even your breath could betray you. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were truly widespread or the product of fringe fear-mongering. But even if not every villager believed in ghost bedsheets, the cultural pressure was thick enough to keep most people dressed like funeral guests while they slept. And for those who didn't conform, consequences came quickly. Public shame, religious rebuke, and sometimes worse. Here's a chilling image. A woman named Martha, living on the edge of town, was found dead one morning. Nothing unusual. She was elderly. But when the midwives came to prepare her for burial, they discovered she'd died naked in bed. That detail alone was enough to prompt a retroactive accusation of witchcraft. No trial, just whispered certainty that the devil had claimed her in the night. They buried her in unconsecrated ground. Not because she had hurt anyone, but because she had died too free. You start to realize, lying here in this past, that bedtime was never about sleep. It was about surveillance, maintaining order, reinforcing hierarchy. You wore the approved layers, not because they made you safer, but because they made you legible. Society knew what to do with a buttoned-up citizen, but a naked sleeper, that was chaos in human form. And yet, not everyone complied. In the far reaches of the colonies, on the borders where civilization met wilderness, rules began to fray. Among frontiersmen and fur trappers, sleep was dictated by survival, not sermons. Some accounts describe naked sleeping as practical. It kept clothes dry, minimized lice, and made it easier to dry wet garments overnight. These weren't luxury choices. They were strategies, but they also cracked the door for new thinking. What if nakedness didn't invite sin? What if it just meant comfort? That question, still unspoken, begins to drift like smoke into the future. But for now, you're still in the grip of Puritan nighttime logic. Your limbs twitch under the weight of linen and shame. The room smells of wood smoke and damp wool. Somewhere, an owl cries. A woman across town rolls over and hugs herself beneath too many layers. A man wakes from a dream he can't explain and prays for forgiveness. Everyone's dreaming, but no one is free. Not yet. You wake to the whisper of silk soft, deliberate, and sinfully smooth. The room around you doesn't creak or shudder. It purrs. Candlelight bounces off polished marble floors and golden moldings. Perfume lingers in the air. Something floral. Something dangerous. Welcome to the bedchamber of royalty, where modesty is a prop and nudity is a performance. This is no peasant shack or Puritan attic. This is the court. France, Italy, maybe Vienna. Doesn't matter. What matters is that here, bedtime is theater. And what you wear or don't wear to bed could change your life. You're standing in a corner, barely noticed, watching a noblewoman get undressed. Not by herself, of course. She has 3 maids, each trained to undo tiny ribbons without making a sound. One peels off her outer gown, another removes her corset, and the last carefully unties the silk chemise. Layer by layer, status evaporates into skin. This isn't intimacy. It's ritual. Every tug and fold communicates power. Who touches her, who's allowed to see her shoulder, who gets to stay in the room once the final piece drops. You're seeing the anatomy of hierarchy, not just the human body. Because in the courtly world, nakedness wasn't taboo. It was regulated, allowed in specific settings, controlled by etiquette, and often choreographed for effect. A queen might reveal a shoulder while reclining on a velvet chaise, not because she's warm, but because she's sending a political message. Her skin, perfectly pale, unmarked by labor, is proof of her untouchability. Meanwhile, a duchess might strategically disrobe in front of a rival to assert superiority. Look at me. I have nothing to hide. Can you say the same? And yet, for all this theatrical freedom, the bedroom remained treacherous. You weren't just being watched by ladies-in-waiting. There were rumors, intrigues, political alliances made and broken under the covers. Sleep was no longer survival, it was diplomacy. You had to consider who was allowed to see your nightwear, who helped you change, who entered your bedchamber last. Because those weren't just private moments, they were data, gossip, weapons. Let's peel into a sex story from Eleanor Herman's archives. Picture Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, resplendent in brocade, lying on a mountain of pillows in his Versailles apartment. He has a favorite mistress tonight, Madame de Montespan, but before she enters, 2 valets remove the king's wig, another spritzes rosewater on his chest, and a priest, yes, a priest, gives a quiet blessing. Royal sex, after all, was not purely personal. It was a sacred duty, a show of virility, a symbol of the nation's health. Once Montespan enters, the ceremony shifts from public ritual to private indulgence. She reportedly wore nothing to bed except a sapphire necklace, a gift from the king meant to draw the eye to purity and desire at once. Romantic, sure. Manipulative, absolutely. Because even naked, they were never fully alone. Now here's a fringe tidbit for your collection in some noble courts. It was customary for visitors to be shown the sleeping chambers of the lord or lady as part of a home tour. The bed itself, a towering canopy affair with velvet drapes, was a status symbol. The more elaborate the embroidery, the more legitimate your lineage. And if you were bold, you might leave your nightshirt artfully folded on a velvet stool, just to let guests imagine the rest. Nothing says wealth like suggesting you can afford to sleep without anything touching your skin except 10-thread Egyptian cotton. But here's the irony. While the nobility played these bedtime games, the public was watching and judging. For every tale of silken seduction, there were pamphlets accusing nobles of moral decay. Their beds are lined with satin, their hearts with filth. One Protestant writer sneered. The idea that the elite could sleep naked while preaching modesty to the masses wasn't lost on anyone. It was hypocrisy on parade. And eventually, it would cost some of them their heads. Literally. Historians still argue whether royal bedtime customs were truly scandalous or simply magnified by anti-aristocratic bias. But one thing is certain, privacy was a currency, and nudity could either elevate or destroy you. You had to use it wisely, or not at all. Let's slide into another example, a quieter one. A lesser-known duchess in 17th century Bavaria once caused a minor international incident by refusing to sleep in the nightgown gifted to her by a visiting ambassador. The gown was too sheer. She claimed it was an insult, a suggestion that she was a courtesan, not a noblewoman. The ambassador swore it was a cultural misunderstanding. She insisted it was political sabotage. Eventually, a priest was brought in to mediate, because nothing solves fashion disputes like divine arbitration. The result: the gown was burned, publicly, as a statement. But everyone whispered about what she might have worn instead. You begin to see that in these rooms. Beneath these chandeliers, sleep wasn't rest, it was strategy. The temperature was carefully controlled, not just for comfort, but to prevent sleep sweats that might compromise a lady's complexion. Maids sometimes slept at the foot of the bed, not for safety, but to ensure no secret visitor entered after curfew. Mirrors were draped to avoid vanity sins. And in some households, it was said that if a woman smiled too easily at breakfast, people assumed she'd slept naked, because only pleasure could produce that kind of glow. Even pillows were suspect. Soft pillows meant indulgence. Hard pillows meant discipline. One royal cousin to Charles II supposedly swapped out his wife's goose feather pillows for ones filled with dried beans, just to keep her humble. She divorced him 2 years later, but not before leaking the detail to every gossip rag in London. For a while, bean pillow became slang for a joyless marriage. It's almost comical, this obsession with bedtime conduct. But then you remember the rules weren't designed for comfort. They were tools. Tools to control, to seduce, to climb social ladders, and nudity. That was the most dangerous tool of all, because it could make you look powerful, or vulnerable, or just real. And real was the one thing aristocratic society could never tolerate for long. So here you are, lying under embroidered sheets that cost more than your maid's annual wages, trying not to sweat, trying not to snore, and definitely trying not to dream of anything inappropriate, because dreams could leak, and someone always talks. You pull the silk higher up your chest and listen for footsteps, not for safety, but for witnesses. Because tomorrow, the court will wonder, did you sleep well? Did you look radiant at dawn? And if you did, what did you wear to bed? You wake up to the smell of incense, roses, and just a hint of powdered ego. The ceiling above you is frescoed with naked cherubs. The bed frame is carved with scenes from Roman mythology. And somewhere nearby, a servant is already preparing a light broth and maybe a stronger drink because you've just spent the night sleeping with a king. Not metaphorically, literally. Welcome to the backstage of royal intimacy, where power is tangled in sheets, seduction is a form of diplomacy, and removing a nightshirt becomes an act of political theater. You're not in love, you're in strategy. And every soft sigh and exposed wrist might change a nation's fate. Because here, in this boudoir of velvet secrets, sex isn't just a private act, it's a policy. This time you're with one of the many women cataloged in Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings. A mistress. Yes, but far more than that. She's a negotiator, a manager, a brand strategist in ruffles. Her name isn't important yet. What matters is that she's standing at the edge of the bed, lit by candlelight, slowly undoing the ties of her robe, while the king lounges, eyes half-lidded, deciding whether tonight he wants entertainment, advice, or affection. Sometimes all three. She's not there because she's the most beautiful. She's there because she understands the script. When to lean in, when to laugh, when to slip out of her nightclothes with just enough hesitation to look both obedient and desirable. That kind of choreography is worth a duchy. Last night's affair wasn't spontaneous. It began with a whisper at dinner, a glance during cards, a compliment disguised as a correction. Then, the summons, delivered discreetly, perhaps via a folded note in a servant's hand, inviting her to the king's private chambers, not his bedroom. Mind you, there's a distinction. His private retreat, where furniture is minimal, lighting is strategic, and no one enters without permission. She arrives fully dressed, as always, not in showy jewels, but in subtle signals, a ribbon of his favorite color, the faintest dab of amber oil behind one ear. Then the dance begins. Historians still argue whether these nightly routines were expressions of genuine affection or pure political manipulation. The truth, like most royal liaisons, is likely both. Kings didn't just sleep with women, they slept with symbols. The favored mistress reflected the monarch's taste, temperament, and even ideology. A strong-willed, outspoken mistress. It meant the king admired wit, a soft-spoken beauty with healing hands. He sought comfort in chaos. And if she was rumored to sleep in the nude, it meant he craved vulnerability, rawness, something real, or at least something that looked like it. Our mistress of the night is no fool. She knows the game. She's read the room. She waits until the king rises slowly, theatrically, and makes the first move. A kiss to the wrist, a question about her dreams. Then, with delicate hands, she helps him remove his nightshirt, not all at once, one button at a time, like a curtain before a performance. She does it not out of love, but because timing is everything. If she undresses him too quickly, she's eager. Too slowly, she's cold. So she finds the rhythm, and when it's her turn, she lets her own gown fall in one smooth motion, practiced 100 times, as if gravity itself is seduced. And here's your sex story, less scandalous than sweet, yet razor sharp beneath the lace. Madame de Pompadour, famed mistress to Louis XV, reportedly insisted on sleeping with the king, wearing nothing but a sheer muslin wrap tied with a single silk ribbon. The wrap was easily removed, but it was the ribbon that mattered. She called it the conversation knot. The idea, the king had to untie it slowly while she asked him about the day's politics. If he answered well, she let the robe drop. If not, she'd turn her back, claiming fatigue. It became a ritual, one that made her indispensable, not because of what she did in bed, but because of how she controlled the lead-up. Let's add a fringe detail in some courts. It became fashionable for royal mistresses to publish anonymous bedtime memoirs, not as books, but as whispered stories passed through salons. One such tale described a mistress who claimed she could judge a man's honesty by how he removed his own nightwear. The liars pull too quickly, she said. The faithful pause at the collar, Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. The story shaped perception, and perception shaped everything. Back in the bedroom, things grow quiet. The king has drifted off, snoring softly under a coverlet embroidered with golden fleur-de-lis. Our mistress, still bare beneath the sheets, lies awake, not dreaming, but planning. She's calculating which ambassador to flatter tomorrow, whether she can influence the king's decision about a new tax. She's not just a lover, she's a liaison. Her nudity isn't weakness, it's leverage, a weapon of soft power. But it's not always glamorous. Sometimes, sleeping with a king means waking before dawn to sneak back to your official room, avoiding the glares of other courtiers. Sometimes it means hiding bruises, or secrets, or both. One mistress of Peter the Great once said that she never slept well, even in silk sheets, because she was always waiting for his mood to turn. Power doesn't make you safe. It just changes the kind of danger. Let's not romanticize it. This wasn't liberation. It was survival. A woman in this position had to be an actress, a therapist, a strategist, and a ghost. Seen when useful, invisible when inconvenient. She might be praised one day and exiled the next. One rumor, one misplaced comment, and her whole world could vanish. And if she was known to sleep naked, that detail would be weaponized. Either she was a temptress, manipulating the crown with flesh, or a fallen woman unworthy of influence. Same act, two narratives. The difference depended on who was telling the story. And yet, some women leaned into it, embraced the spectacle, turned their bedrooms into statements. A mistress of Charles II reportedly redecorated her bedchamber in all red velvet, including the bed sheets, to remind him of sin while he sinned. Another, in Spain, filled her room with mirrors, not for vanity, but so the king could see himself from every angle. These weren't passive women. They were architects of perception. Historians still argue whether these women truly shaped policy or were just pawns with satin privileges. But if you follow the trail of letters, treaties, and last-minute decisions made in the bedroom, a pattern emerges. Comfort created confession. Nakedness lowered defenses. And in that vulnerable moment between pillow and plan, real power was sometimes brokered, not shouted from a throne, but whispered beneath a canopy. So here you are, lying in the warmth left behind by silk and perfume, wondering what stories this bed could tell. Who plotted here? Who wept? Who conquered? The fire has dimmed, the air thick with secrets, and somewhere beyond the chamber doors, the court continues to spin. But here, in the stillness, you understand something that no history book will say plainly sometimes. Sleeping naked wasn't rebellion or sin. It was strategy. A calculated choice in a world where clothing was a cage, and skin was the only weapon left. You wake in the choking blackness of a London alley. There's soot on your skin, a coal-stained crust around your eyes, and the scratch of burlap against your ribs. Not because you're wearing burlap, but because it's the blanket. If you're lucky, it might also be someone's coat, or a pile of rags. The Industrial Revolution has arrived, and with it, the death of the quiet, private night. Sleep is no longer a sacred act, or even a political statement. It's a logistical nightmare. Cities swell like bloated lungs. Factories roar all night long. And everyone, from the chimney sweep to the seamstress, is crammed into airless rooms with too many bodies and not enough beds. And sleep. Sleep is dirty, loud, and painfully public. You want to take off your clothes at night, You want to sleep naked, go ahead. Just try it. You'll either freeze, be robbed, or wake up next to a cousin, a rat, or both. You push open a door into one of the new tenement buildings, 5 floors stacked with the ambition of a fire trap. The hallway stinks of boiled cabbage, coal dust, and desperation. Inside, one room holds a family of 7, including a crying baby and a grandfather who coughs like he's negotiating with death. Beds are optional. Most just sleep on the floor. Entire neighborhoods exist in this haze of human steam and soot. And in this world, the idea of undressing before sleep feels laughable. Your clothes are your armor, against cold, against judgment, against lice. It's not just about modesty anymore, it's about survival. You come home from a 12-hour factory shift, your fingers raw from the loom or the machine press, and you collapse onto whatever horizontal surface exists. You don't undress. You don't even unlace your boots. You sleep like a soldier in a trench, because you might have to wake and fight at any moment for food, for quiet, for a place to relieve yourself. The bed isn't a sanctuary anymore. It's a war zone. And here's the cruel twist. The more uncomfortable sleep becomes for the poor, the more luxurious it becomes for the rich. In high society, flannel pajamas become a thing soft, expensive, tailored. Bedrooms are now designed like palaces within palaces. Canopy beds with velvet drapes, gas lighting with delicate lampshades, silk nightgowns with matching slippers. The upper class has discovered sleep hygiene, a concept that sounds modern, but was already being marketed in 1850 as a way to show class, order, and superiority. And of course, what better way to reinforce class boundaries than by labeling naked sleep as savage? The Victorian medical journals, freshly bound and dripping with condescension, warn readers that sleeping without clothes is uncivilized and incompatible with modern moral order. One London physician even argued that naked sleep is the province of animals, not men, conveniently ignoring that half his patients could barely afford a second shirt, let alone a clean nightgown. Historians still argue whether this medical scorn was rooted in genuine health concerns or class anxiety. Probably both. Doctors of the day were obsessed with the idea of miasma's bad airs that supposedly floated through cities and infected those foolish enough to sleep exposed. They recommended thick nightwear, tightly shut windows, and frequent changes of undergarments, which was great advice if you had servants to launder everything. If not, you just marinated in your own sweat, hoping the lice didn't get into your scalp again. Now let's slide into your sex story gritty, industrial, and a little sad. There's a record from Manchester in 1842 of a mill girl, 17 years old, who shared a one-room flat with 4 siblings. One night, a factory inspector visited their building, yes. That was a thing, and reported seeing her sleeping improperly disrobed under a single sheet. The phrase was vague, intentionally so, but the implication was devastating. She lost her job 2 weeks later after rumors spread. Her manager said, "We can't have moral weakness among the young women." She was replaced by a girl with 3 more layers of petticoats. And never mind that she wasn't actually naked, just uncovered by accident, in the middle of a fever dream. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, a banker's wife lies on Egyptian cotton sheets, sipping warm milk, dressed in a lace-trimmed nightgown designed to flatter the bust but hide the ankles. She reads a medical pamphlet claiming that sleep is most productive when the body is kept neither too cool nor too warm, and always decorously clothed. Her husband, already snoring beside her in a flannel robe, dreams of mergers. Neither of them will ever know what it feels like to collapse onto a wooden floor in factory clothes. too tired to breathe. Here's a fringe tidbit you didn't ask for, but can't unknow in Victorian boarding schools. Some educators believed that sleeping naked was a sign of rebellion, even madness. One headmaster reportedly expelled a student after discovering he had removed his nightshirt during a heat wave. The reason: lack of fortitude. Apparently, keeping your clothes on in July was proof of moral character. The boy later became a doctor, possibly out of spite. And yet, amid all this repression, the body kept pushing back. People still dreamed, still longed for cool air on skin. A few brave souls even advocated for it. One eccentric writer, Harriet Martineau, once hinted in a letter that she slept without her stockings, and her peers treated it like a confession of lesbianism and spiritual collapse. But she didn't retract it. She said, a woman should have freedom in her bed, if nowhere else. And though she was ridiculed, a few women quietly agreed. They just didn't say it out loud. You start to realize that in this era, nudity wasn't just about skin. It was about class, about who got to choose their discomfort and who had it forced upon them. The poor wore their clothes to bed because they had no alternative. The rich wore theirs because it was fashionable to pretend discomfort was virtuous. And in the middle, a few dreamers tugged at their collars, kicked off a sock, and dared to imagine a night without cloth or consequence. So here you are, lying in a one-room flat that smells of ash, your breath fogging in the cold. Someone coughs beside you. Someone else turns over. You don't know if it's midnight or dawn, and it doesn't matter. You're not asleep. You're surviving. You want to take off your shirt, just for a second, just to feel human. But someone might see, someone might whisper, and then it's over. Not just the moment, but your job, your safety, your place in this fragile, filthy system. You roll over, bury your face in your arm, and dream of warmth that doesn't feel like punishment. A breeze that doesn't threaten your virtue. A world where you don't have to apologize for having a body. You wake with a jolt, not from a nightmare, but from shame. Not because of what you did, but what you might have. You're lying in a stiff single bed in a quiet, candlelit room, and your hands are where they shouldn't be. Or maybe they're exactly where every teenage body instinctively places them during sleep, but not in this century. Not under this roof. Not with these books on the shelf beside you. The year is 1895, and you've just entered the most awkward, anxious, and pathologically suspicious chapter of sleep history, the era of masturbation. Panic, where doctors became moral inquisitors, pajamas became prophylactics, and sleep itself was no longer a place to rest, but a trap set by your own body. You sit up in bed, heart racing. Not from guilt, not really, but from years of quiet conditioning. Every boy at school heard the same whispers, that if you touch yourself in the dark, your bones will weaken, your spine will curve, your skin will pale, your thoughts will rot, and you'll become a lunatic. There were posters, diagrams, pamphlets handed out in churches, schools, clinics. The act had a name so terrifying, it practically clanged like prison bars. Self-abuse, not self-discovery, not self-exploration. Abuse, as in injury, as in damage, to your future, your health, your soul, and worst of all, it might happen in your sleep, without you even knowing. So what do? You armor up. You reach for the flannel sleepwear your mother insisted on. Long, thick, buttoned to the chin. Some had straps to keep your hands above the blankets. Others were designed with tight seams around the groin to discourage wandering fingers. Some families even made boys wear gloves to bed. The gloves were sometimes fastened with string, or locked. Yes, locked. Doctors sold actual devices, tiny belts, padded cages, all to prevent the betrayal of your own body. Historians still argue whether the 19th century obsession with preventing nocturnal emissions was more about religious control or early pseudoscience. The answer, of course, is both. This was a time when sexuality was pathologized, medicalized, and moralized all at once. Entire medical careers were built around the idea that semen was a non-renewable life force. Lose it too frequently, and you deplete your vitality. One prominent doctor compared ejaculation to losing a pint of blood and an ounce of brain tissue. That wasn't metaphor. He meant it literally. And let's not pretend girls escaped. For them, it was even worse. Because women weren't just expected to resist desire, they were expected not to have it. So if a young girl was caught sleeping naked, or even in a state of visible relaxation, she was accused of moral frailty. Sleep became diagnostic. Did she sigh too often in the night? Did she roll her hips? Did she resist waking? These were all signs, according to Victorian sleep manuals, of incipient degeneracy. The solution? Heavier gowns, tighter beds, less privacy, more prayer. Let's slide into your required sex story here. From the erotic spirit through history. There's an account of a young man in Vienna whose mother discovered soiled linens after several nights of dreaming. She took him to a doctor, an early Freudian practitioner, who prescribed cold baths, total abstinence from sugar and red meat, and a mechanical sleeping harness that kept his legs spread and his arms tied at the sides. The boy later confessed that the device didn't prevent anything. It just made him terrified of bedtime. For the rest of his life, he could only fall asleep fully clothed, upright, and with a crucifix in his mouth. You can't make this up. And yet, someone did. Because that's what this entire period was, a massive, society-wide game of make-believe, where natural impulses were rebranded as deadly threats, and sleep became a crime scene. The paranoia was so intense that entire industries sprang up around it. Anti-masturbation beds were sold to boarding schools. They came with stiff ridges, elevated centerpieces, and arm restraints. One even included a bell that would ring if a boy turned over too quickly. Not if he touched himself, just if he moved. And here's your fringe tidbit for the night. One British factory owner in the 1880s installed sleep inspectors for his apprentices. These were older men tasked with patrolling the dormitory halls at night, shining lanterns into beds to ensure no one was sleeping inappropriately. The criteria: blankets too low, hands near the groin, eyes too closed. What exactly too closed meant is unclear, but the implication is obvious. Even the appearance of self-comfort was a problem. What's terrifying is how much of this was framed as love. Parents truly believed they were protecting their children. Doctors claimed they were saving lives. Schools thought they were preserving civilization. And the victims' boys and girls across Europe and America learned to fear their own bodies, to mistrust pleasure, to treat their dreams like crimes they hadn't meant to commit. And so they armored up flannel, belts, gloves, ropes. They turned their beds into battlegrounds. And yet, the desire didn't disappear. It went underground, into diaries, into coded language between friends, into fantasies whispered between candlelight and confession. Some brave souls even challenged the system. A French woman named Léonie, writing under a pseudonym, described in her journal how she intentionally slept naked each night as a protest against the prison of virtue. Her journal was discovered after her death. The priest who read it reportedly fainted. There were whispers of change. Sigmund Freud, strange and controversial even in his own time, began suggesting that dreams might not be sinful, but meaningful, that the body's reactions during sleep weren't crimes, but clues. Of course, his theories were immediately twisted into new forms of control. But the door had cracked, and once it cracked, more followed. Still, for now, you're lying in a stiff bed in a world that believes your subconscious is your enemy. You feel the sweat on your chest, the itch beneath the collar, the pulse in your fingertips. You want to remove the nightshirt, just for a moment, just to breathe. But your mother is just down the hall. Your doctor visits weekly, and the pamphlet on your nightstand warns that a single lapse in willpower can ruin your entire future. So you lie still, hands clenched, eyes wide open. You're not sleeping. You're holding a vigil for your virtue, for your health, for your sanity. And deep inside, a voice you've never heard out loud says, "Maybe this is all nonsense, but it's too dangerous to speak, even to yourself, especially in the dark." You wake to birdsong, but not the quaint kind, not a gentle robin outside a window. This is a feathered alarm clock from nature herself, loud, proud, and echoing across a communal campsite. The air is cool, your skin is warm, and you're surrounded by trees, sky, and a faint smell of firewood and fermented cabbage. You blink up at the sunrise and realize, with both relief and surprise, that you're completely naked. And so is everyone else. Welcome to the early 20th century's boldest, barest experiment in human harmony, the nudist utopia. You haven't stumbled into a scandal, you've entered a philosophy. In Germany, in France, across the Netherlands, and into Scandinavia, groups of men, women, and children are embracing a radical new idea. Sleeping naked isn't just acceptable, it's healthier, holier, human. Before, the early nudists weren't exhibitionists. They were idealists. Doctors, teachers, artists, people sick of corsets, sick of sweat, sick of the thick industrial fog that seemed to cling to every aspect of modern life. So they stripped, not for seduction, but for salvation. They called it Freikörperkultur. Free body culture, and it was more than just a sunbath. It was a belief system that the natural state was the best state, that sleeping with nothing between your skin and the earth made you stronger, purer, and closer to the divine. And yes, they slept naked, not because they were lazy, but because flannel was considered oppressive. You roll over on your blanket, no mattress here, just tightly packed straw, and see a row of tents pitched in a circle. Inside each, couples snore softly, their feet sticking out from under light cloths. Some have thrown their sheets off entirely, exposing pale thighs and tan lines like badges of honor. No one cares. No one watches. Or if they do, it's with curiosity, not condemnation. These are people trying to reprogram their instincts, away from shame, toward freedom. Let's pull back the canvas flap and look at the philosophy more closely. The nudist movement was often tied to vegetarianism, exercise, clean air, and anti-modern medicine. Doctors in Germany promoted nude sleep as a treatment for everything from insomnia to nervous frailty. Some early sleep camps even had rules: no talking after dark, no touching, and absolutely no nightclothes. Clothing trapped bacteria. They said it stifled circulation. It encouraged bad posture. One well-known pamphlet claimed that a single night in tight garments can do more harm than a week of poor diet. Was it true? Maybe not, but it felt true to people gasping for breath under coal-stained skies and rigid social norms. Now let's slide into your required sex story. Except, this one's weirdly wholesome. In one of the first nudist colonies in France, a poet named Antoine reportedly fell in love with a baker named Lucille after hearing her sleep. Not seeing her, hearing. Her slow breathing, the way her sighs matched the rhythm of the wind. He claimed he knew she was pure of soul by the way she snored. They eventually married. Their ceremony was held entirely nude. Even the priest wore nothing but a wooden cross. It made headlines across Europe and was condemned by 3 different religious councils. But the couple, they slept soundly ever after. This is the strange magic of the nudist era. It wasn't sexual, but it was sensual. It reconnected the body with the environment. People reported better suor sleep, fewer nightmares, clearer skin, and some said even more vivid dreams. Whether or not that was placebo didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in centuries, people were choosing what they wore to bed. Or didn't. Here's a fringe tidbit. Some nudist sleep camps had communal snoring competitions. Participants would lie in a shared lodge, all naked under identical wool blankets. And judges, yes, actual judges would rate the musicality of their snoring. The winner got a fresh pillow and the honorary title of Dreamer of the Month. It sounds like satire, but it happened. Multiple times. People were that enthusiastic about reinventing sleep culture. But of course, utopias never stay pure for long. As nudist communities grew, so did outside suspicion. In conservative circles, sleeping naked was still synonymous with sin. Police raided camps. Magazines published sensational articles about naked communes corrupting youth. One American columnist called nude sleepers the unwashed anarchists of bedtime. Politicians tried to regulate nudist retreats, forcing them to post guards, build fences, and ban co-sleeping. In Germany, some of the earliest nudist clubs were briefly outlawed under the Nazis, not because of the nudity, but because of the socialist ideals behind it. Freedom of the body was seen as a threat to state control. Historians still argue whether nudist movements were more about personal health or social rebellion. Probably both. For many, sleeping naked was a gateway drug to larger defiance against capitalism. Patriarchy, organized religion. If your body didn't belong to the state during sleep, maybe it didn't belong to them during the day either. And that thought, naked and unpolished, was terrifying to those in power. Still, the movement persisted, quietly, softly, a kind of whisper through the curtains of traditional morality. In post-war Europe, some therapists even began recommending naked sleep for trauma recovery. They said it helped reconnect people with their bodies after the disassociation of war, and for Holocaust survivors. Some found that sleeping without clothing, without uniforms, without numbers, was the first time they felt human again. No straps, no belts, no constraints, just breath and skin. Let's add one more story. In 1933, a Swedish doctor named Elsa Borg opened a women-only sleep retreat in the countryside. The rules were strict. All guests must sleep outdoors, under the stars, naked and alone. No contact, no chatter, just you, your blanket, and the sky. It became wildly popular. Not because it was erotic, but because it was quiet, peaceful, free from judgment. Elsa said, "A woman who can sleep without shame can rise without fear." Her camp ran until 1941, when it was shut down by conservative ministers who feared moral contagion. But her journals survived, and her influence echoed through feminist circles for decades. So here you are, lying beneath a sky full of stars, a breeze skimming your bare legs. You're not worried about modesty, or germs, or ghosts. You're worried about nothing. Because in this tiny sliver of history, naked sleep isn't dangerous. It's healing. You close your eyes and drift, not into sin, not into dreams of punishment, but into the quiet possibility that maybe, just maybe, we were never supposed to sleep with our bodies locked away. You wake up on a couch, but it's not your couch. It's long, curved, covered in velvet, and just slightly too firm. There's a faint smell of tobacco in the air, and a ticking metronome somewhere behind you. You try to sit up, but a voice gently instructs you to lie back down, close your eyes, and speak freely. You've just landed in Freud's office, Vienna, early 20th century, and tonight's sleep will not be peaceful. It will be interpreted. Because here, nakedness is no longer about morality or rebellion. It's about psychology. It's about what your dreams mean, where your desires hide, and whether that feeling you had last night while dozing off is a suppressed memory, an Oedipal fixation, or just indigestion. Freud isn't interested in whether you wore pajamas. He wants to know why you wore them, what they reminded you of, what your mother wore, what your father didn't. Welcome to the world of psychoanalysis, where your sleep posture might reveal your deepest fear, and your decision to sleep in the nude could be read as unresolved trauma wrapped in a sexual metaphor. Nudity has crossed into your subconscious. It's not about sin anymore, it's about symbols. You lie back on the couch, eyes closed, and describe a dream. In it, you're walking through a hallway filled with doors. One opens to reveal a bedroom. Inside a bed with no sheets, just warm air, golden light, and the undeniable sensation of being observed. You're naked, not embarrassed, just exposed. You hear footsteps but can't move. You wake up sweating. Freud raises an eyebrow. He doesn't ask if you've sinned. He asks if you've remembered. Historians still argue whether Freud was a genius decoding the human soul or a self-important man with mother issues and a cigar addiction. But there's no denying that he reshaped how we talk about sleep. For the first time, the naked body wasn't just a moral dilemma or a health decision. It was a text, to be read, interpreted, analyzed. What you did in your dreams wasn't private, it was diagnostic. Your sleeping nudity was no longer shameful. It was revealing, literally and metaphorically. Let's take a moment for a sex story. From this strange new world of velvet divans and heavy eyelids. One of Freud's patients, a wealthy, anxious widow, reported recurring dreams of herself undressing in front of an open window. Every night, the window changed locations. One night, it overlooked a courtyard. The next, a train station. The next, a funeral. Freud listened carefully and concluded she was subconsciously grieving her role as an object of desire. She had internalized her youth, her sexuality, her visibility, and the act of undressing had become her soul's way of saying goodbye to public femininity. Whether or not he was right. The dreams stopped after 10 sessions. She began sleeping in a silk chemise instead of full cotton pajamas. Her insomnia disappeared. Let's not forget your fringe tidbit. Some early psychoanalysts experimented with dream mapping, literally drawing the rooms, beds, and bodies described by patients to look for patterns. They claimed recurring symbols, like being naked in a public place or waking up in someone else's bed, were indicators of repressed ambition. One patient's recurring image of sleeping in a library nude was interpreted as desire for intellectual dominance over patriarchal systems. Others thought it meant she missed her father. Freud's circle was never short on interpretations, but the ripple effect was real. Suddenly, sleep wasn't just rest, it was confession. What happened in the dark? Your dreams, your thoughts, your comfort level with your own skin was no longer irrelevant. It was central to who you were. The decision to sleep naked became not just a practical matter, but a psychological one. Were you comfortable in your body or trying to reclaim it? Were you seducing yourself, punishing yourself? Escaping, and as Freud's influence spread, so did the self-help industry. Sleep books flooded the market. Manuals on analyzing your dreams, taming your nocturnal self, sleeping like the successful. And yes, a few titles boldly encouraged sleeping naked to reconnect with your primal authenticity. Suddenly, nudity at night was framed as self-awareness, enlightenment, even empowerment. The body was no longer the enemy. It was a narrator. But of course, society wasn't quite ready to hand over that kind of freedom. Doctors might praise naked sleep in one breath, but then warn about overstimulation of the subconscious in the next. Churches weren't pleased. Parents were horrified. And skeptics rolled their eyes. Still, the idea took hold, especially among artists, writers, and the quietly rebellious middle class. A naked sleeper wasn't just a rebel anymore. They were introspective, intellectual, possibly even tortured in a poetically attractive way. Let's drop into another case. A Russian novelist living in Paris reportedly insisted on writing in the mornings only after a full night of sleeping completely nude, wrapped in a single linen sheet. He claimed it was the only way he could hear his truest thoughts. His wife, meanwhile, complained he kept the windows open in winter and refused to wear socks. He published 4 novels in 5 years, then died of pneumonia. But the myth stuck. His bedroom became a shrine to creative authenticity, and fans came from across Europe to see the sheet he once sweated through in search of truth. You begin to see how layered this era becomes. Nakedness, once a cause for punishment, has become a mirror. It reflects your fears, your dreams, your neuroses, and people lean into it. Sleep diaries become fashionable. Some literary salons require attendees to bring written accounts of their dreams. In one absurd twist, a theater troupe in Berlin stages a play entirely based on the cast's sleep habits, each actor performing monologues about what they wear to bed and what that says about their soul. Of course, backlash follows. There are op-eds condemning the excess of self-examination. One British critic declares that too much awareness of one's own nakedness leads to decay of national character. Another says, keep your dreams to yourself and your nightshirts on. But the tide is shifting, because for every skeptic, there's a quiet sleeper, lying in bed, eyes closed, wondering if letting the sheets touch bare skin means they're finally honest with themselves. So here you are, lying on that imaginary Freudian couch, back in your own bed now, perhaps with less velvet but just as many thoughts. You're staring at the ceiling, wondering if that dream you had about being on stage, wrapped in bed sheets, applauded by faceless strangers, means you crave attention or fear vulnerability. You wonder if your decision to sleep without socks last night was about temperature or control. You wonder if maybe just maybe, sleeping naked isn't about sin or seduction at all. Maybe it's about truth. You reach for the corner of the blanket, pull it up, and let your bare shoulder stay uncovered. Just for a moment. Not for anyone else. Not for history. But for you. And in the stillness of that half-lit room, you smile. Because whether Freud would approve or not, you've just taken the first step in decoding your own sleep story. You wake to the artificial flash of a camera bulb. Not because someone's photographing you, but because just beyond the frame, someone else is pretending to sleep. She's draped in white satin, legs angled just right, eyes half closed in a look that says, innocent, but interesting. And the light catches the curve of her bare shoulder like a deliberate accident. Welcome to the golden age of Hollywood, where nobody sleeps like they actually sleep, and nakedness is both forbidden and absolutely everywhere. You've entered the world of twin beds, invisible bras, and the Hays Code, a place where film stars never share a blanket, never show a belly button, and yet somehow manage to ooze enough sexual tension to fog an entire cinema. The 1930s to 1950s were the most paradoxical era of sleep on screen. America was obsessed with purity on paper, but hypnotized by suggestion in practice. In movies, couples couldn't be shown in bed together unless the beds were twin-sized and separated by at least 24 inches. A woman could only be seen in a nightgown if it reached her wrists and ankles. And even then, it had to move stiffly. Soft fabric was too provocative. And yet, somehow, film after film featured women waking up looking flawless, with tousled curls, smudged eyeliner, and a suspiciously glamorous robe, just casually slipping off one shoulder. You sit in the audience, popcorn in hand, watching a scene unfold. A man enters the bedroom. A woman gasps, clutches her nightgown, and turns her back. The camera pans to a window. Wind rustles the curtains. Cut to black. We all know what just didn't happen. That's the brilliance of the code. Deny everything. Suggest everything else. And the audience, they're not fooled. They're fluent in subtext. They know exactly what those curtains mean. Behind the scenes, the actors knew the game. They couldn't be naked, but they could act like they just had been. There was a whole choreography to it. Lying diagonally on a bed, exposing a calf, but not a thigh. Draping a blanket to reveal a collarbone, but hide the curve beneath. Costume designers became engineers of suggestion, building gowns that clung in all the right ways while meeting every technical requirement. One designer famously sewed fishing weights into the hems of a starlet's robe so it would fall more naturally as she walked away from the bed. Historians still argue whether the Hays Code actually repressed sexuality or simply forced filmmakers to become more creative with it. Either way, the results were iconic. Audrey Hepburn waking up in a man's shirt, hair perfectly disheveled. Cary Grant in striped pajamas that somehow made him more dangerous. Marilyn Monroe in a white satin sheet that behaved more like a lover than a blanket. We watched them sleep, but more importantly, we imagined what they wore when the camera wasn't rolling. And that brings us to tonight's sex story, a real one. From the pages of old studio gossip columns and whispered memories. A 1952 contract clause from a major Hollywood actress reportedly stated that she refused to wear anything to bed except her perfume. It wasn't Marilyn, though we'll get to her. It was a European import with a husky voice and a reputation for being too exotic for American tastes. Her name, confidential. But her clause became legend. The director insisted she wear a modest nightgown for a bedroom scene. She refused. The compromise, she wore the gown, but only after being allowed to film 2 takes with nothing underneath, just for authenticity. The unused footage was allegedly destroyed, but no one forgot the argument, or the atmosphere it created on set. Here's your fringe tidbit for the evening: the Hayes office, which reviewed and approved all film content, once issued a formal note to a studio stating that a scene featuring a woman adjusting her pajama waistband in bed was suggestive of bedroom intimacy, inappropriate for general audiences. Adjusting a waistband, that was the threat. And yet, in the same movie, a male character strips to a towel while flexing. No comment was made. Apparently, female comfort was more dangerous than male vanity. The audience, meanwhile, was evolving. By the 1940s, people were already mimicking Hollywood bedroom aesthetics. Middle-class women bought satin robes not because they were practical, but because they made them feel glamorous during their nightly routines. Men began matching pajama tops and bottoms, not for warmth, but to channel that Clark Gable ease. Beds became stage sets, and bedtime became a performance, even if no one was watching. But the tension was real, because outside the theater, people were still judged for how they slept. Religious radio shows reminded listeners to honor modesty, even in solitude. Some advice columns even warned that sleeping naked could weaken moral resolve, especially for teenage girls. And yet, in private, sales of silky sleepwear soared. Bath powders, vanity lamps, frilly slippers. People wanted to look like their favorite stars. They wanted to feel like them. Even the military got involved. During World War II, soldiers were instructed not to sleep nude in bunkers, citing both hygiene and emergency preparedness. But letters from the front lines tell a different story. Men writing home about ditching uniforms at night, of sleeping in boxers, or nothing at all, just to feel human again after days in mud and blood. One letter, censored but partially preserved, reads, "Last night I dreamed of you, and I swear the only thing I had on was your name. It's corny, but it's real." Let's return to Hollywood for a moment, to the most iconic naked sleeper of them all, Marilyn Monroe. When asked in a 1953 interview what she wore to bed, she replied, "Just a few drops of Chanel No. 5. That answer broke the world. It was coy, it was shocking, and it was the birth of a branding empire. Sales of Chanel spiked, fan mail poured in, and other starlets began crafting their own bedtime identities. Suddenly, sleep wasn't just a personal ritual, it was a marketing tool. Historians still argue whether Marilyn meant it literally or if it was just the perfect quote. It doesn't matter. The point was she owned it. In an era when women were still being warned about bedroom decency, she turned her naked sleep into mythology. Her bed was no longer a site of shame, it was a stage. So here you are, in a dim bedroom lit by the blue glow of a black and white TV, the soft hum of old dialogue lulling you to sleep. You think of the stars, the suggestions, the silences between the lines. You wonder what it must have felt like to lie in a twin bed on a set, pretending to sleep, pretending to be decent, while the whole world watched and imagined otherwise. And maybe, as you pull your own blanket a little higher, or slip a little lower beneath the sheets, you feel a flicker of that same rebellion, that same desire to be both unseen and unforgettable, to sleep not for someone else's comfort, but for your own mystery. You wake to silk sliding across skin like a secret. There's a click of a lighter somewhere in the dark, the sweet scent of perfume and cigarette smoke mingling with the hush of night. And beside you, her voice. Soft, playful, devastating. She says she's not wearing anything to bed. Not a stitch. Just Chanel number 5. And right then, a cultural bomb goes off. Because this isn't just any woman. This is Marilyn Monroe. And that single whisper of a sentence, playful, poised, and scandalously minimalist, launches a new era where bedtime becomes branding. Nudity becomes legacy. And sleeping naked isn't something you do in secret, it's something you confess. Proudly. To millions. Marilyn didn't invent naked sleep. But she made it glamorous, dangerous, inevitable. One quote, one interview, and suddenly everyone is imagining the body beneath the blanket. Not because they're perverts, though, let's be honest. Some of them are, but because she cracked something open. A cultural permission slip. She said what no one else dared to say on record, that sleep could be sensual, luxurious, and unapologetically yours. She turned bedtime into a whisper campaign, and the whole world leaned in. But here's the thing, Marilyn's quote wasn't just sexy, it was strategic. By saying she wore only perfume to bed, she wasn't just selling a fantasy, she was selling power. The idea that a woman could choose how she felt most beautiful at night, not for a man, not for a priest, not for a moral code, but for herself. It was rebellion, hidden in a bottle, and everyone heard it. Sales of Chanel number 5 exploded. So did pajama sales, robes, sheets. Suddenly, what you wore or didn't wear to bed wasn't just private behavior. It was identity. Let's step into that bedroom, the real one, behind the icon. According to friends and photographers, Marilyn often slept with the windows cracked, the sheets thrown low, and a stack of books on the nightstand. She didn't like thick pajamas, said they felt like armor. She needed the feel of the sheets against her skin, the coolness, the vulnerability, but also the control. She curated her sleep the same way she curated her screen presence with precision. Myth, and moments of raw honesty that slipped through like moonlight through curtains. Here's your sex story. And yes, it involves Marilyn. Kind of. One of her most famous lovers, an aging playwright who shall remain mostly unnamed, once said that Marilyn would often wake in the night from vivid dreams and begin talking in a half-sleep voice about childhood, about shame, about longing. One night, she woke him up laughing. Said she'd dreamed of sleeping in a pile of rose petals, naked, while being serenaded by penguins in tuxedos. He asked if she was cold. She said, "Only my toes." But they were polite about it. He said it was the most honest thing he'd ever heard. That's the brilliance of Monroe. She blended humor with heat, tragedy with temptation, and her bedtime persona. It became legend. Magazines rushed to ask other starlets what they wore to bed. It became the new interview question. The old, "What's your favorite book?" was replaced by, "What do you sleep in?" And suddenly, every actress had to have an answer. Something flirty, memorable, something that would make headlines. A few said men's shirts. Others said nothing but mascara. One even claimed she slept in rubber boots and a smile. But none of them hit like Marilyn. And here's a strange little fringe tidbit in 1960. A New York advertising firm ran a study showing that men were more likely to buy a product if it was associated with a woman's sleep habits. Perfume, obviously, but also bed sheets, night lights, alarm clocks. One ad campaign literally said, "Make her dream of you buy Egyptian cotton." Subtle it was not, but it worked. Sleep was now a battleground for fantasy. Historians still argue whether this era of celebrity bedtime branding liberated women or just repackaged them. Was Marilyn's confession an act of defiance, or just another carefully sculpted image sold to a male-dominated media machine? The truth is complicated. Marilyn herself admitted that the quote about Chanel was part joke, part truth. It was the simplest thing to say. She later told a friend, and it made people blush. That's power. But while the headlines loved the soundbite, real women were making quieter choices, inspired by the icons. Yes, but also curious. Women across the country started experimenting, slipping off nightgowns, trying new fabrics, sleeping nude, just to see how it felt. And many found it wasn't about seduction at all. It was about relief, comfort, clarity. One housewife from Illinois wrote in her diary, "I tried sleeping without my slip last night. I felt like I was flying, like I had secrets again." Meanwhile, the backlash simmered. Some religious groups called the new trend a descent into vanity. Magazines warned that sleeping nude may lead to moral softness. One headline read, "Is your wife's nightwear corrupting the children?" Because, of course, if a woman felt good about her own body, that had to be dangerous. Even hospitals had opinions. A few issued statements urging patients to wear full pajamas to avoid accidental shame during emergency care. But the genie was out of the bottle and wearing perfume. Let's step into another room. Not Marilyn's this time, but yours. You're alone. The lights are low. The sheets are clean. Maybe you've tried it. Maybe you've slipped off the last layer and felt that strange mix of thrill and fear. No one sees you. No one judges you. And yet the moment feels electric. You're not doing it for attention. You're doing it because something inside you is curious. What does it mean to sleep without a boundary? To trust your own skin enough to let it breathe in the dark? It's not about beauty. It's not about being watched. It's about agency. Monroe knew that. That's why she smiled when she said it. Because her body had been public property for so long, sold, photographed, dissected. But her sleep, that was hers. What she wore to bed, or didn't, was a choice no studio could script. So here you are, wrapped in thought, in warmth, in the faint glow of legacy. Somewhere out there, a bottle of perfume still sells because of a whisper made 70 years ago. And somewhere in your own thoughts, a question lingers. If sleeping naked once meant sin, then seduction, then empowerment, what does it mean? For you, tonight, maybe nothing, maybe everything, maybe just a little softness between your soul and the world. You wake to the scent of antiseptic and linen, not the comforting kind, the kind that whispers clinical precision and post-war anxiety. The fluorescent light above you hums, cold and institutional. You're not in a bedroom anymore. You're in the sanitized dream of the 1950s. Here, everything has a label: your job, your gender role, your mealtime, your bedtime. Even your pajamas come with instructions. Welcome to the decade of dinner at 6, dishes by 7, and sleep by 10 in matching flannel sets, preferably monogrammed. Sleeping naked. That's not freedom. That's suspicious. In this age of suburban order, bare skin at night is either an act of defiance or a symptom of something unwell. Because in the post-war world, cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness, it was godliness. And any deviation from the script might mean you're communist, crazy, or worse, French. You step into a master bedroom where everything matches: curtains, bed sheets, pajamas, personalities. The husband wears a crisp pair of blue-striped long johns. The wife wears a floral cotton set, modest neckline, hair still perfectly set in curlers. They kiss goodnight like a ritual. Lights off at 10:01. She rolls to her side. He snores by 10:04. There's no room here for improvisation. The world just survived global chaos. Nobody wants surprises in bed. But beneath the surface, tensions simmer. The 1950s is obsessed with hygiene. Doctors appear on television to lecture housewives on proper sleep conditions. Bedrooms are inspected by parenting magazines. If your sheets aren't boiled weekly, your morals might be undercooked too. One article insists that sleeping without undergarments could lead to bacterial compromise and improper dreaming. Improper dreaming. Let that sit for a second. As if your subconscious needs an etiquette manual. And yet, the scientists are arriving. Slowly. Carefully. With graphs and lab coats and ideas that don't quite fit into the perfect suburban home. They've begun studying sleep, not just behavior, but biology. REM cycles, brain waves, body temperature. And what they're finding is uncomfortable, it turns out. The body sleeps better when it's allowed to cool naturally, when it's unencumbered. When, dare we say it, it's naked. Let's slip in your sex story. Shall we? A mid-century American couple, both public health workers, began a quiet experiment in their marriage. They decided to ditch nightwear for 6 months to monitor physiological and emotional results. Their notes, later discovered in a forgotten archive box, show a fascinating trend. Not only did they sleep more soundly, but their morning arguments decreased. They claimed that skin-to-skin contact made them feel more honest. I stopped hiding in cotton, the wife wrote. It was easier to say hard things when I didn't have buttons between us. And yet, they never told their neighbors. The fear of being found out was stronger than the benefits. Because in this decade, your curtains weren't just for blocking light, they were for protecting your reputation. A crack in the blinds could mean the end of your social life. A whisper about nakedness could cost you your job. Here's your fringe tidbit in 1957. A public service pamphlet titled The Clean Sleep was distributed to young women entering marriage. It included a section called Proper Night Dress for the Moral Wife, which advised always wearing at least 2 layers and a bedtime brassiere to maintain bust shape overnight. The implication your husband might be watching, even in dreams, or worse. You might be watching yourself and finding something you shouldn't. Historians still debate whether the 1950s were truly sexually repressed or simply pretending. But repression doesn't always look like avoidance. Sometimes, it looks like obsession with control. Everything in this era is regulated decor. Diets, sleepwear, and the pressure to conform bleeds into your bedroom. Women are told that being too sensual, even in private, is dangerous. Men are told to channel all desire into marriage, and marriage is expected to be sanitized, scheduled, and modestly passionate. And yet, whispers persist. Advertisements begin to tease. Lingerie companies market bedroom glamour, not for the man, but for the woman's self-esteem. Articles with titles like "Feel Like a Queen at Bedtime" emerge, showing housewives in silk chemises, holding perfume bottles, staring into mirrors with a look of longing not for their husbands, but for their own reflection. It's subtle, but it's there, the beginning of sleep as self-care. Not performance. Let's visit another bedroom. A teenage girl lies in her twin bed, covers pulled high, transistor radio hidden under her pillow. She listens to Elvis, and dreams of something bigger than her pastel room and modest gown. She doesn't sleep naked yet, but she begins to imagine it. Not in a sexual way, in a freedom way. What would it feel like to ditch the lace collar, to let her body breathe, to move without restriction? These are the seeds, tiny, quiet rebellions growing under blankets, across the country, in laboratories and think tanks. Sleep researchers are discovering strange things. That people who sleep nude tend to toss less. That core body temperature plays a major role in deep sleep. That couples sleeping skin to skin report lower stress levels. But the public isn't ready to hear it. Doctors give their findings in technical terms: thermoregulatory efficiency, epidermal desensitization. But the subtext is clear. Clothes at night might be killing your rest. And still, no one wants to be first. No one wants to say out loud, "I sleep naked." Except one. A quiet, silver-haired woman named Dr. Eugenia Baker, who in a 1958 radio interview casually remarked, "I prefer sleeping without garments. It keeps my dreams honest." The station received over 1,000 letters. Some were scandalized, others intrigued. But the idea was now out there. Naked sleep wasn't just a fantasy. It might be good science. So here you are, in a bedroom that smells faintly of starch and optimism, tucked into sheets your mother boiled that morning, wearing pajamas you received at your bridal shower, staring at the ceiling and wondering what it would feel like to just let it go. Just once. Just one night. You roll onto your back. The fan hums. Your skin itches. Not from filth. From rules. You imagine peeling off the gown, feeling the sheets as sheets, not as barriers. You don't do it, not yet. But the thought lives now. Inside you. Quiet. Warm. Waiting. You wake to the scent of weed, damp wool, and revolution. There's a harmonica playing badly outside your tent. Someone's barefoot and frying something questionable over a fire. You open your eyes, and you're not in your bed. You're on the ground, in a sleeping bag that probably doesn't belong to you, on a patch of trampled grass that's still warm from someone else's dreams. Welcome to the 1960s, or more specifically, welcome to Woodstock, or Altamont, or 1,000 other makeshift festivals, communes, and crash pads where naked sleep isn't rebellion anymore. It's just how it's done. There's no bedtime routine here, no matching pajama sets, no skincare rituals or perfectly fluffed pillows. There's only body heat, tangled limbs, and the rhythmic hush of strangers learning how to be unafraid of skin. You shift under your borrowed blanket, if you're even lucky enough to have one, and someone's elbow brushes your arm. Maybe they're asleep. Maybe they're just stoned. Doesn't matter. Because in this world, nakedness is no longer charged with shame or strategy. It's ambient. Background. Normal. The counterculture movement wasn't just about politics. It was about dismantling everything that made people feel locked inside themselves. Clothes were one of the first things to go, especially at night. Because sleep wasn't just recovery here, it was communion. With nature, with each other, with some idea of a future less suffocating than your parents' living room. So people took off their shirts, their bras, their underwear. They slept naked under trees, in tents, on shag rugs, on each other. And it wasn't always beautiful. It wasn't always consensual. But it was honest. Historians still debate whether the sexual revolution was truly liberating, or just another version of male entitlement in bell-bottoms. But in those first raw waves of freedom, sleep became a kind of therapy. After protests, after long nights of singing and sweating, people collapsed together. not out of lust, but because the body had finally stopped being a secret. Let's slide into your sex story. This one's hazy, like everything from this decade, and may or may not have happened in a barn outside San Francisco. A woman named Rain, probably not her real name, kept a dream journal filled with half poems and entries like, "Woke up tangled with 3 souls. One was crying, one was humming, one was missing." She later described how she couldn't remember who she had actually touched that night, but that she had never felt more understood. For her, naked sleep wasn't about sex. It was about erasing the idea that the body had to belong to anyone, especially not shame. Here's a fringe tidbit. In 1969, a group of artists in New York hosted a sleep-in exhibition. Visitors were encouraged to strip down and nap together on mattresses scattered across a gallery floor. It was part installation, part protest against Vietnam, and part experiment in radical vulnerability. One journalist who attended wrote, "I expected an orgy. I got 20 strangers snoring and someone reading Allen Ginsberg aloud." Back in the mainstream, America was panicking. Magazines ran pieces with titles like, "Is Your Daughter Naked in a Commune?" "Right Now and the Naked Epidemic," "Among Our Youth." Preachers warned that sleeping without clothes weakened moral boundaries and increased susceptibility to subversive ideas. One even claimed that Satan enters through the skin, not the soul. Meanwhile, in Berkeley, students were sleeping nude in shared apartments, arguing that modesty was just another way to uphold class systems. But not everyone was radical. Some were just tired. Factory workers who'd marched for civil rights by day stripped off their uniforms at night and slept without barriers because they were too exhausted to care. Veterans home from war found that sleeping naked was the only way they didn't feel like they were still in uniform. And yes, some folks just finally had central heating for the first time in their lives and decided to enjoy it. You begin to realize that this era wasn't about one big awakening. It was about thousands of small exhalations. People taking off clothes they never chose in the first place. Parents' expectations, church warnings, government pamphlets. Suddenly, they could sleep like they imagined people must have done in the beginning, naked, sweaty, and unbothered. Let's revisit that tent, the one you woke up in. You step out into morning dew, barefoot, shivering slightly, but not uncomfortable. Someone hands you coffee in a tin cup. You thank them without asking their name. Last night, you don't remember falling asleep. You remember someone playing guitar, someone else singing out of tune, and the sudden sense that no one was looking at you with judgment, just shared breath and shared sky. You feel the grass under your toes and think this is how people are supposed to sleep. Not wrapped in fear, not swaddled in reputation, just present. But of course, the dream didn't last. The 70s brought backlash, rising crime, disillusionment, AIDS. People retreated into their private spaces. The openness of communal living gave way to a new kind of guardedness. And slowly, pajamas returned, not out of modesty, but out of exhaustion. The world was changing again, fast, and people wanted their own beds, their own locks, their own quiet. Still, something from this era remained. The memory of what it felt like to sleep beside someone without pretense, to wake up bare and unafraid. And that memory, like the scent of bonfire in your hair, days after the party's over, stuck around. So here you are, decades later, lying in your own bed with your own pillow, your own sheets, your own playlist humming low through your phone. You think of that summer you slept under the stars with strangers, or that apartment you shared when rent was $200 and no one owned pajamas. You remember the freedom, the messiness, the warmth of skin, not in sex, but in sleep. You don't need a revolution tonight. You just need rest. But maybe, as you peel off that final layer, let the blanket settle onto bare skin. You carry a little piece of that radical honesty with you. The simple truth that your body, just as it is, belongs to no one but you. You wake up to the sound of bells, not church bells, wind chimes, delicate, endless, and suspiciously in tune with your chakras. There's incense curling in the air, something earthy, with a hint of citrus, and beneath your spine is a mat woven from natural fibers that feel both sacred and scratchy. You're not in a bedroom. You're in an ashram, or a retreat center, or maybe just someone's over-decorated living room, where a guy named Ravi told you the universe lives in your pelvis. Either way, you're here for enlightenment, for peace, for something real. And like all things in this rear-branded East meets West journey of the 1970s, that means unlearning everything you thought you knew about your body, your mind, and most surprisingly, how you sleep. Because in this new spiritual ecosystem of borrowed mantras and recycled wisdom, sleep isn't just unconscious downtime. It's a gateway, a spiritual function, an energetic realignment. And your clothes, they're just interference, just another layer between your soul and the cosmos. So you strip not just because it's warm, not just because you're curious, but because the guru said, the body must rest the way it arrived on this earth, free, open, and loved. And everyone around you nodded. So now you're lying there, naked except for a thin blanket and an overdeveloped sense of self-awareness, wondering if you're achieving nirvana or just cultivating a very awkward draft. The 1970s spiritual awakening was a mixed bag of sincerity, opportunism, and intense body awareness. People flocked to gurus, yoga masters, and self-proclaimed mystics in search of healing, meaning, and a decent backbend. And while some of it was grounded in ancient traditions, much of it was freelanced, pieced together from texts no one fully understood, but deeply felt. And one of the key themes repeated across these teachings: the body must sleep freely. Let's dip into your sex story now. This one comes from an early tantric school run out of a healing compound in Northern California. A couple called them Jaya and Dean spent 6 months practicing conscious co-sleeping. The idea was that their souls would commune more clearly in the theta brainwave state. They slept nude, of course, often under a sky window, and each morning began with a sacred touch sequence that may or may not have involved coconut oil and Sanskrit chants. Jaya later wrote in her memoir that they never made love during those 6 months, but she said she had never felt more intimately connected. She could feel his aura before she even opened her eyes. Dean, for his part, later became an accountant. Amen. In these communities, sleep was something to curate, not just where or with whom, but how. You weren't supposed to fall asleep drunk or distracted. That polluted the energy. Instead, you meditated. You aligned your breath. Some groups even practiced circular sleep, a method where everyone lay head to feet in a circle, naked, to equalize vibrational fields. One woman said it was like being inside a heartbeat. Another said she got ringworm. Here's your fringe tidbit. An infamous sleep experiment in Oregon involved sleeping naked in shifts on a rotating platform while listening to whale sounds and Tibetan bowls. Participants reported lucid dreams of past lives, and at least one claimed to have astrally projected into a cafe in Paris, where she watched herself eat a croissant from a previous incarnation. The facilitator later admitted the platform was just a repurposed turntable from a failed amusement park ride. But despite the spectacle, something deeper was happening. These sleep practices, no matter how absurd, were often the first time people had permission to experience their bodies without judgment, especially women, especially queer people, especially anyone raised on decades of shame and dress codes. To lie down naked and unafraid in a room full of other seekers was, for many, the closest they'd ever come to self-acceptance. Historians still argue whether these movements were genuinely spiritual or just post-hippie escapism with better lighting. But the personal testimonies are hard to dismiss. People wrote journals, recorded dreams, painted their nightly visions. They described feeling rewired by the act of sleeping without clothes, that the absence of fabric meant the presence of something else, a deeper awareness, a kind of honesty. And not everyone went full guru mode. Some just took a yoga class and stopped wearing pajamas because they realized they slept better that way. Simple. No cosmic realignment, just comfort. But even that was revolutionary in its own quiet way, because the line between self-care and self-liberation was beginning to blur. Let's zoom in on one more story. A woman named Elise, raised Catholic and divorced by 30, started attending soul sleep circles where people gathered to talk about their dreams and sleep rituals. She never joined the group sleep-ins, too self-conscious, but one day she decided to try sleeping nude for the first time, alone. She lit a candle, turned on some sitar music, and crawled into bed with nothing but a pillow and a journal. She wrote that she cried before falling asleep, not because she was sad, but because she realized she had never felt her own skin against her sheets before. Not like that. Not on purpose. That's the quiet revolution of this era. Not the bells, not the incense, not the auras, but the tiny moment where someone says, "This is my body. I don't need to cover it in shame when I rest." Of course, the backlash was inevitable. TV specials ran exposés on spiritual sleep cults, warning parents that their children might be seduced into communal nudity and Eastern mysticism. Conservative columnists called it a bedtime Trojan horse for moral collapse. One particularly intense editorial declared, "America was built in flannel, and it will fall in linen." But by then, it was too late. The idea had planted itself, that maybe naked sleep wasn't weird. Maybe it was healing. Maybe it was natural. Maybe it wasn't about sex or rebellion at all. Maybe it was about coming home to yourself. So here you are, lying on your own bed, or your own mat, or your yoga bolster, or whatever you've claimed as your nighttime altar. The lights are low. The air smells like eucalyptus. Maybe you've got a playlist on called Sleep Temple Vibes. Maybe it's just the sound of your breath. You peel off the last layer of fabric and settle in. Not because a guru told you to, not because it's trendy, but because tonight, you're curious. What if the skin is enough? What if nothing between you and your sleep is exactly what your soul has been asking for? You close your eyes. The bells ring faintly. And for once, you don't feel like you're doing anything wrong. You just feel present. You wake to a cold patch where your body used to be. Sheets crumpled, hair matted, breath still fogging from the last dream that fled your mind too fast to hold. The room is dark, except for the blue halo of a charging phone. Your alarm hasn't gone off yet, but you're awake, and your skin. It's tingling. Not from touch, from air. Because for the first time in a long time, you slept naked, and your body is telling you something that science is only just beginning to say out loud. Welcome to the era of thermoregulation, circadian sync, cortisol cycles, fertility hacks, and neuroscience-backed bedtime choices. It's not the age of shame or rebellion anymore. It's the age of optimization. In today's hyper-aware world of sleep trackers and blue light blocking glasses, naked sleep has been rebranded from taboo to tactical. No longer an act of sin or protest. It's now a health protocol. You're not just shedding pajamas, you're unlocking better REM cycles, boosting melatonin, lowering cortisol, regulating core body temperature. You're not being naughty. You're being efficient, smart, biohacked. You read about it on a wellness blog, maybe heard it on a podcast, sandwiched between intermittent fasting and magnesium gummies. The sleep experts are unanimous. Your body sleeps best when it's cool. And not just cool, like turn the AC on. Cool, like ditch the pants. Trust the skin. Because while your body temperature needs to drop about 1 to 2 degrees to fall into deep sleep, your pajamas are holding in heat like a clingy ex who doesn't know when to let go. Let's go under the blanket of data. Studies now show that skin-to-air contact promotes thermal homeostasis, allowing your body to naturally regulate itself during the night. That regulation leads to more efficient sleep cycles, fewer interruptions, and even a reduced risk of metabolic diseases. Sounds boring. Right, until you realize that all this science is whispering something ancient your body wants to sleep naked. Always has. It just took modern medicine a few centuries to catch up. Here's your sex story. This one clinical, crisp, and oddly poetic. A fertility clinic in Denmark began tracking the sleep habits of couples trying to conceive. The unexpected finding. Couples who slept naked together had a higher conception rate, even when controlling for diet, age, and lifestyle. Why skin-to-skin contact lowers stress, boosts oxytocin, and improves testicular temperature regulation. A phrase that's somehow both funny and completely serious. One couple, featured anonymously in a case study, wrote, "We stopped trying to be perfect parents and just started sleeping together. Literally. 2 months later, we were pregnant. And this isn't fringe science anymore. Sleep researchers, reproductive endocrinologists, even psychologists are weighing in. They're all saying the same thing in different words when you sleep naked. You're not just getting better sleep, you're reducing inflammation, improving circulation, and possibly even extending your lifespan. Sleeping naked has become the avocado toast of the wellness world. Popular, stylish, and annoyingly actually good for you. Let's add your fringe tidbit here. In Japan, some high-end capsule hotels now offer sleep pods with custom temperature controls designed specifically for naked sleeping. These temperature-sensitive cocoons adapt to your skin's heat output throughout the night, adjusting airflow like a sci-fi womb. Guests are encouraged to strip completely before sliding into the pod. One reviewer described it as like being held by a really attentive robot that respects boundaries. You begin to realize that naked sleep is no longer weird. It's chic, minimalist, quietly luxurious. It's being endorsed by wellness influencers with matte-filtered bedrooms and fridge tours full of probiotic water. They call it intuitive rest or circadian alignment. One TikTok therapist refers to it as returning to primal authenticity, usually over a looped audio of Tibetan singing bowls and digital birdsong. The message is always the same stripped down. Sleep better. Become more yourself. But beneath the buzzwords, something real is shifting. Naked sleep is no longer seen as morally dangerous or socially fringe. It's just another choice. One among many, and the science has made it safe to admit, you're not a pervert. You're optimizing your lymphatic system. You're reducing nighttime cortisol. You're setting your core body temperature to glide into sleep like a seal into water. And yet, it's not all graphs and lab tests. There's still something intimate about it. Personal. You undress at night, not for anyone else, but because you want to feel the sheet on your thigh, the air against your shoulder, the weightlessness of not being wrapped in cloth. It's not just physical, it's psychological. A quiet return to self. Let's drop into one more story, real and unassuming. A woman named Carly, mid-30s, burned out from remote work and endless doom scrolling, started tracking her sleep with a smart ring. Nothing helped. Not melatonin, not blackout curtains. Then, one night, out of sheer frustration, she stripped everything off, tossed her sleepwear in a drawer, and crawled into bed. No expectations, just skin and quiet. She reported her deepest sleep score the next morning. No dreams, no alarms, just rest. She now sleeps nude every night, calls it my nightly reset. Historians might one day look back on this era and laugh. That it took us this long to trust our own bodies. That we had to justify something so ancient with spreadsheets and TED Talks. But maybe that's what we needed. Permission. Not from the church, not from culture, from science, from data, from the glowing white light of a study that says, you are not a deviant. You're just a mammal with a thermostat. So here you are, in your bed, your watch charging, your phone face down. The thermostat is set just right. The room is quiet. You've brushed your teeth, done your skincare, double-checked your calendar. You peel away the last layer. Let the air touch you. Not because you're trying to make a statement, but because you're listening to your body, to the data, to the small truth rising under your breath like a lullaby. You are allowed to be bare. You are allowed to be comfortable. You are allowed to sleep in the way your body has always known how. No guilt, no judgment, no complicated metaphor, just skin and sleep. You wake up surrounded by pastel light and camera flashes. Your sheets are linen, rumpled in a way that looks accidental, but took 20 minutes to arrange. There's a cup of oat milk matcha on the nightstand, untouched but photogenic. And across the room, your phone is already buzzing, notifications piling up from the reel you posted last night. 5-step naked sleep routine. Because self-love starts in bed. Welcome to the era where sleeping naked isn't just a preference, it's a platform. You're in the heart of sleepwear as self-expression culture, where bedtime is content, pajamas are branding, and nakedness is carefully curated, aesthetic, and often monetized. You scroll through your feed, and it's all there. Silk sets in earthy tones, cotton robes styled like runway pieces, and bare-legged influencers lying diagonally across their duvets with captions like, healing isn't linear, but my bedtime vibe is. Hashtags, #, pajama porn, #, sleep aesthetic. They're naked and nurtured. The line between authenticity and performance has evaporated under soft lighting and color grading. The question isn't whether you sleep naked, it's how you present that fact to the world, how it fits your personal brand. This is no longer the battleground of morality, nor the rebellion of youth. It's marketing, wellness, aesthetic control. And yet, in that filtered space of curated comfort, there's something fascinating happening. Because while the performance is obvious, the intimacy is real. People are, in their own way, reclaiming the night. It didn't happen overnight. In the early 2000s, pajamas were just pajamas. The last thing you put on, often old, mismatched, private. But then loungewear happened. luxury sleepwear brands emerged, promising that rest could be fashionable. Instagram amplified it. Suddenly, sleepwear had to match your home decor, your personality quiz result, your zodiac sign. And once sleep became something to post, naked sleep became something to declare. Quietly at first, I sleep better without clothes, then boldly, as a statement of authenticity. Because in the language of influencer culture, nakedness is a kind of digital honesty. Let's slide into your sex story. This one's set in the modern world of hashtags and self-care Sundays. A content creator, mid-30s, known for her candid mental health posts, shares that she started sleeping naked during a breakup. I felt disconnected from my body, she writes. So I started sleeping in just myself. No fabric, no filter, just me. Her audience responds with thousands of comments. Some share their own stories. Others ask where her sheets are from. One person writes, "Sleeping naked saved me. I needed to feel like I was mine again." It's raw, maybe a little performative, but undeniably real. Here's your fringe tidbit in 2022. A startup launched an app designed to track not just sleep patterns, but sleepwear habits. Users logged what they wore or didn't and correlated it with mood, productivity, and sleep quality. The company's first viral ad. A young woman dancing in slow motion as she throws her pajamas in the trash, overlaid with the slogan, "Undress the day, sleep yourself." Cringe. Yes, but it hit a nerve. Downloads spiked. Historians in the future will argue whether this period was a celebration of self-love or just capitalism in pajamas. And yet, something deeper pulses underneath the aesthetic. People are creating space to feel good in their bodies again. Not for religious approval, not for rebellion, but for relief, for identity, for control in a world where everything else feels choreographed. Because sleep, for this generation, is no longer passive. It's an act of resistance against burnout, a nightly ceremony. And what you wear or don't matters. Sleeping naked becomes a symbol of sovereignty. You're not just tired. You're choosing softness, choosing air, choosing not to be squeezed, shaped, or zipped up before drifting off. Let's visit one more bedroom. It's 3 a.m. The phone is finally down. The filters are off. The blankets are kicked aside. A body, bare and unfiltered, breathes in the quiet. Not for anyone's camera, not for likes, just for rest. That body, for a brief moment, remembers something ancient. This is how I'm meant to sleep. Not branded, not judged, just here, just alive. Of course, it's not always comfortable. The vulnerability of sleeping nude in a world that constantly evaluates bodies can be overwhelming. Not everyone feels safe shedding layers. Trauma, culture, identity, all these shape our bedtime choices. But what's powerful now is the option. For many, this is the first time they've had the choice, to be clothed or not, to feel hidden or revealed. And that's a kind of freedom that generations before couldn't imagine. Even the fashion industry has noticed. Some sleepwear brands now market robes that are meant to be taken off. Others sell matching bed linens and eye masks with taglines like, "So good." You won't need clothes. Nakedness has been reframed as luxury, as taste, as control. But beyond the trends, there's that lingering, quieter story. The one where someone, exhausted from the day, sheds not just their outfit, but the pressure to be anything. They lie down, cool sheet on bare skin, and sigh not from sadness, but from softness, from choosing not to armor up tonight. Because in this curated world of endless content and glowing devices, sleeping naked is one of the few things that can't be filtered. Not really. It's just you, your breath, and the dark. So here you are, lying in bed, maybe still scrolling, maybe already drifting. You think about that influencer who said, "The first time I slept naked, I felt like I was reclaiming my body." And whether you believe her or not, you get it. You feel the truth in it, in the way your skin meets air, in the way silence feels fuller when nothing's between you and your bed. You close your eyes, the feed fades, and for a moment, there is no performance, no matching set, just the sound of your breath and the whisper of fabric gone. You wake to cultural friction seeping into your dreams, not your country, but someone else's. Where naked sleep isn't a choice, it's controversial. You open your eyes and see a passport, tickets, or maybe your phone's weather app toggled between two flags. You're crossing borders, literal or digital, into global sleep norms that clash with your bedroom comfort. Welcome to the world of cultural collisions, where one person's natural bedtime is another community's moral crisis, and naked sleep becomes a symbol, a statement, and sometimes a scandal. In Japan, tradition says you remove your yukata before bed. Somewhere between cultural modesty and temperature control, nude sleep is quietly accepted provided your home isn't seen. But step outside, cross into South Korea, Turkey, or India, and naked sleep is less a novelty and more a taboo. Modesty rules come from centuries of layered clothing, taboos about purity, and religious prescriptions about the line between private and public. In conservative Middle Eastern homes, sleeping naked could provoke family shame, even violence. In Orthodox Jewish tradition, the mikveh cleanses your body before rest, but bedtime attire remains conservative, even if naked before immersion. You're lying on a tatami mat tonight, curious, alone. Maybe you dared to sleep without clothes, but what happens if your neighbor visits, or your family sleeps in the same room? In many cultures, shared spaces mean no option for nudity, even when privacy is promised. Naked sleep is a personal liberty that collides with collective values. Historians still argue whether sleep norms came from climate, religion, or pure patriarchy. In parts of rural Africa and Southeast Asia, people have slept naked for centuries under mosquito nets, in ventilated homes because heat makes clothes dangerous. But when missionaries arrived, they insisted on pajamas as a sign of civilization and modesty. Clothing became colonial power. Naked sleep became a coded threat to Western identity imposed on others. Your phone buzzes with a social media alert. A Scandinavian celebrity posts a naked sleep challenge. Hashtag, people across the Nordics respond with snowflakes and bedroom selfies. In warmer climates, the hashtag is met with bafflement or warnings. You watch the comments. This would kill my modesty. I'd get disowned. And you realize you're watching comfort as culture war. Now the sects story. A European backpacker recounts a night spent topless, sleeping under stars on an Indonesian island, believing naked sleep would improve digestion, heal eczema, or just feel freeing. Instead, she woke to locals scolding her. "You forget where you are," they said. The clash wasn't just about nudity, it was about respect. Her nudity was interpreted as rejection of local values. But to her, it was natural. Still, others find bridges. A traveler staying with a Balinese host family was invited to sleep naked in their ventilated wooden house. As they did. It was normal. It was hot. It felt good. Over tea, her host said, "In my skin. I rest better. Why put fabric between It wasn't a radical statement. It was physiology meeting hospitality. Here's your fringe tidbit. Anthropologists have documented that remote tribes in the Amazon and Papua New Guinea sleep naked or nearly except when seasons shift. But contact with modern medicine often brings clothing and shame with it. Health workers propose pajamas to ward off bugs, ignoring that skin-to-air contact was protective in that environment. Nudity becomes disease, not comfort. In Europe or the US, naked sleep is now part of wellness culture. Travel influencers brag about sleeping naked in Airbnb bamboo breezeways. Some boutique hotels market nude sleep retreats, not sexual, but sensory. But global travelers tell stories of shame in shared hostels, insults at beachside homes, and the pressure of norms upping their nighttime pants. You consider the cultural latitude of sleep. In liberal societies, naked sleep can be empowering. In conservative ones, it can be dangerous. A woman in the Middle East writes privately online about sleeping in loose pajamas beneath a bias, by day her own tiny resistance. A man in China texts about sleeping nude to ease night sweats, but turns on the fan and keeps quiet. And yet, some soft common ground appears across the world. When sleep becomes restful, when bodies breathe, when neither guilt nor performance intrude, people notice it, even in conservative households. Once a fan broke and someone slipped out of nightwear by accident. The ripple reaction was immediate whispers, not always negative. Sometimes relief, sometimes curiosity. Naked sleep becomes a doorway to conversation. Let's imagine your own cultural borderland. Your parents come to visit. Do you sleep naked? Intimate ties tangle with familial respect. Or you share a bed on vacation in Bali or Greece. Do you reveal more of yourself? Some travelers return home. Changed, they sleep differently. Proudly, but quietly. So here you lie awake, sheet resting lightly on your thigh. Free, yet cautious. You wonder, is naked sleep your identity, or just your body's preference? And if your norm feels natural to you, does it offend someone else? Or can comfort become understanding if shared gently? Sleep is universal. Naked sleep is deeply personal. It can divide or unite. It can heal or hurt. And tonight, under your own roof or someone else's, you realize rest is more than physical. It's cultural, political, emotional, and maybe, just maybe, the most radical thing you can do tonight is simply let your skin breathe without apology, but with awareness. You wake to a whisper, not of debate or doctrine, but of comfort. The silence feels like validation. Soft, yet resolute. You're lying in your own bed. The sheets feel neither oppressive nor performative. You're naked. No campaign, no trend, just skin and silence. Welcome to the present moment, where naked sleep has journeyed from sin to strategy, from scandal to sovereignty, and now it's whispered permission for personal peace. Here, your choice isn't about rebellion, religion, or Instagram platforms. It's about the quiet revolution of self-care in a world that never stops talking. In the centuries you've traversed, naked sleep has worn many faces. It was sin in Eden's myth, shame under monastic wool, scandal among peasants and Puritans, luxury in Versailles, propaganda in the industrial era, therapy and psychoanalysis, revolution at Woodstock, spirituality in ashrams, branding on Instagram, and now it's simply a possibility, a legitimate option among pajamas, onesies, and silk blends. You can choose warmth, freedom, regulation, or nakedness, and it means Nothing. At least, nothing violent. Nothing punitive. No cross against the wall. No sermon waiting at dawn. Just choice. You lie beneath cotton, linen, or bamboo. The label doesn't matter. What matters is this. Tonight isn't about what your sleep says about your morality, your class, your rebellion, or your marketability. It's about reconciling centuries of judgment with a moment of personal permission. It's about recognizing that, at last, you get to sleep on your terms, naked, clothed, guarded, or free-willed. And that is the real miracle. You realize naked sleep now isn't mission-driven. It's not a viral challenge. It's not a protest. It's not therapy or OPEC strategy. It's a whisper of kindness you offer yourself when the world is loud. It's healing, simple, radical in its unremarkable nature. Because after all these revolutions, all these debates, all these reasons to fear your own body, the most empowering thing left. Just letting your skin breathe without explanation. Tonight, you close your eyes. You feel the gentle caress of air against bare flesh. Or maybe you feel the soft brush of fabric against skin. Your decision isn't dictated by trends or taboos or health blogs. It's about what feels restorative to you. Nothing more, nothing less. No performance, no voyeur, no judge. Just rest pure, personal, and private. So you breathe in, you breathe out. Your heartbeat softens, your mind unwinds. The blankets cradle rather than restrict, and your body remembers what it felt like to rest without burden, without a name, without a statement. Just you. Naked sleep isn't a movement now. It's a moment. Yours.